She was broke, exhausted, and one missed paycheck away from losing everything. And somehow, that was the moment a billionaire walked into her life and asked her to pretend to be his. Not his girlfriend, not his wife, just someone who would stand beside him and smile while the wolves circled. Emma Hart said yes because she had no other choice. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the arrangement would cost them both far more than they bargained for, and that somewhere between the lies they told the world, they would stop being able to lie to each other. This is their story. Stay until the end. And drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The coffee machine at the back of the diner had been broken for 11 days. Emma Hart knew this because she was the one who'd filed the repair request, twice. And she was the one who'd been hand-delivering styrofoam cups of instant coffee to the regulars at Table 7 ever since, smiling through their complaints like it was her personal fault that the heating element had given out on a Tuesday. "This tastes like hot dirt," said the man in the gray blazer, pushing the cup toward the edge of the table without looking up from his phone. "I know," Emma said. "I'm sorry, the machine's still being serviced." "Then get me a Coke." She got him a Coke. She did not say what she was thinking. She needed the tip. It was 7:14 in the morning, and Emma had already been on her feet for 2 hours. The diner opened at 5:30. She'd been there since 5 to help with prep. And her other shift, the one at the dry cleaners 3 blocks east, started at 2 in the afternoon and ran until 8. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she picked up a third shift doing data entry for a logistics company that paid $12 an hour and required her to work from a laptop balanced on her kitchen table while she ate dinner standing up. She was 30 years old. She had a bachelor's degree in communications that she'd finished paying off 2 years ago and a studio apartment with a radiator that clanked all winter like something was trapped inside it. She was not doing fine. She had stopped telling people she was fine. It took too much energy to maintain the performance. By 9 o'clock, the morning rush had thinned out, and Emma was wiping down the counter when Greta, the diner's owner and a woman of approximately 60 who ran the place like a military operation, appeared from the kitchen with an expression Emma had learned to read as bad news. "Sit down a minute." "I'm still on the clock." "Sit down." Emma sat on one of the counter stools. Greta stood across from her, arms crossed, looking at a point slightly above Emma's head like she couldn't quite bring herself to make eye contact. "I need to cut your hours," Greta said. "Starting next week." Emma felt the floor shift under her feet even though she was sitting. "How many hours?" she asked carefully. "I can give you 3 shifts instead of 5. Maybe 4 if Maria needs a day off." "Greta, I know." Greta finally looked at her. The woman wasn't cruel. That was the hardest part about this. She wasn't cruel at all. "The inspector's coming back next month, and I have to do the kitchen renovation before then, or they'll fine me again. I can't afford both the renovation and full staff hours." "I'm sorry, Emma. If things improve by the fall—" "It's March," Emma said. "I know what month it is." Emma stood up. She picked up her rag. She went back to wiping down the counter because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. "Okay," she said. 3 shifts. She did the math in her head while she worked the rest of the morning, the numbers arranging and rearranging themselves like a puzzle that kept coming out wrong. 3 shifts at the diner plus the dry cleaner plus the Tuesday-Thursday data entry equaled roughly $1,900 a month before taxes. Her rent was $1,420. That left $480 for utilities, groceries, the minimum payment on her last remaining credit card, and whatever else the month decided to throw at her. A bus fare increase had gone into effect on the 1st of March. Her landlord had mentioned, very casually, over her mailbox, that building costs were going up. She thought about calling her mother in Dayton. Then she remembered that her mother was living on a fixed income and had been quietly asking Emma for money twice in the past year, and Emma had sent what she could. She didn't call her mother. Adrian Cole had a daughter named Lily, who was 7 years old and completely obsessed with frogs. Not in a passing phase kind of way. In a this is a serious academic interest kind of way. Lily had books about frogs, a poster of the poison dart frog species taxonomy on her bedroom wall, a stuffed frog named Senator. She had named it Senator, she'd explained, because he looked like he was about to make a very important announcement. And she had twice attempted to bring live frogs home from the park, in her jacket pockets. Adrian had learned about both incidents after the fact. On the morning that everything began to change, Adrian was sitting in his kitchen at 6:45, watching Lily eat cereal and explain to him why the glass frog was evolutionarily superior to most other amphibians. He was holding his coffee with both hands and doing his best to follow along, which was difficult because he'd gotten 4 hours of sleep and he had a board meeting in 2 hours that he'd been dreading for the past 3 weeks. The glass frog, Lily said, very seriously, has transparent skin on its belly. You can see all its organs. Its heart is beating right there, and you can watch it. That's incredible, Bud. It's called translucent, she corrected. Not transparent. I got the word wrong last week, but I looked it up. My mistake. She pointed her spoon at him. You didn't say the wrong word. I did. Don't take credit for my mistakes. He looked at her, this small, strange, extraordinarily opinionated child, and felt that familiar rush of something that didn't have a clean name. It wasn't just love. Love was too simple. It was love tangled up with responsibility and fear and the constant low hum of, please let me do this right. Fair enough, he said. I won't. Mrs. Patterson, Lily's nanny and the person responsible for holding the household together, appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:15. She was 61, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and communicated disapproval through very specific silences. Your car is here, she said. Thank you. You didn't eat. I'll eat at the office. The silence that followed was extremely specific. I'll eat at the office, Mrs. Patterson. He kissed Lily on top of her head, put his coffee cup in the sink, and picked up the briefcase he'd packed the night before. At the door, he paused. Senator doing okay? He called back. Senator is fine, Lily called back. He gave a very good speech this morning about the water cycle. Adrian walked to his car, smiling. Then he got in, and the smile faded, and he looked at the folder his assistant had prepared sitting on the seat beside him, and he became someone else. The other version of himself, the one the world actually dealt with. The drive to Cole Technologies headquarters took 18 minutes on a good day. Today, it took 26. He used the extra 8 minutes to review the folder, and by the time the car pulled into the underground garage, he had a very clear picture of exactly how bad things were. The short answer was bad. The longer answer required context. Cole Technologies was, by any reasonable metric, a success story. Adrian had built it from a software consultancy he'd started at 24 into a technology company with operations across 11 countries and a market valuation that had cleared $7 billion the previous fiscal year. The company held patents in AI-assisted logistics, healthcare data management, and a proprietary cybersecurity architecture that 3 major governments had licensed for critical infrastructure. By 32, Adrian Cole was the kind of rich that stopped being a real number and became an abstraction. He was also, by his own accounting, a mediocre socializer, a poor networker, and someone who found most small talk physically exhausting. He had a small circle of people he trusted, a slightly larger circle of people he worked with, and approximately zero interest in expanding either. This was, as his chief of staff Marcus Webb never missed an opportunity to remind him, a strategic liability. You don't play the game, Marcus told him once, not unkindly, and the game doesn't care. Marcus was waiting for Adrian in the conference room outside the boardroom when Adrian arrived, and the expression on Marcus's face told Adrian that the folder had, if anything, undersold the situation. How bad? Adrian said, setting his briefcase down. They're calling it the Shanghai misalignment. Marcus pulled up a document on the room's central screen. The story broke on 2 financial news sites early this morning. Someone fed them a narrative that the Cole-Harrington data deal is in trouble because of a leadership instability issue on our side. Leadership instability. Rumors that you're isolated. That the company's direction is being driven by a board faction without your full engagement. That there's internal fighting. Marcus paused. They're also running a parallel piece about your personal life. That you're... He looked uncomfortable. Say it. That you're emotionally erratic, that losing your wife 5 years ago and raising a kid alone has made you erratic, unpredictable, not in a good way. Adrian sat down. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at the document on the screen for a long moment. Helena had died of an aggressive cancer when Lily was 2 years old. It had been the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He didn't talk about it publicly. He didn't perform grief for media consumption. He had simply kept moving, kept working, kept showing up for his daughter, and told himself that was the only way through. Apparently, someone had decided that his silence was a story they could weaponize. "Who's behind it?" he asked. "We don't have confirmation. My best guess is Dalton Reeves." Marcus said the name with a particular flatness. "He's been positioning himself to lead a board coup for months. If he can create enough noise around your stability, some of the quieter board members might break the other direction before the Shanghai vote next month." Dalton Reeves was a board member who had been with Cole Technologies since its early days. He was 54, well-connected in ways that Adrian had never fully mapped, and had disagreed with Adrian's strategic direction on approximately 70% of every major decision in the past 2 years. He was also, Adrian had long suspected, the kind of man who believed the end completely justified the means, as long as the end benefited him personally. "What do we need?" Adrian asked. Marcus hesitated. "Don't do that," Adrian said. "Whatever it is, say it. We need to change the narrative, fast, before the board meeting in 4 weeks. Marcus sat down across from him. The erratic and isolated angle only works if there's nothing pushing back against it. The PR team has some ideas, but... He paused again. Their most effective idea is one you're not going to like. Tell me anyway. You need someone beside you, someone visible. Not a business partner, not a colleague, someone personal. Marcus held up a hand before Adrian could speak. I know how you feel about this. But we're not talking about anything dishonest. We're talking about optics. Someone who can accompany you to the Zhang Industries dinner next week, to the Harbison Tech Conference the week after. Someone who looks like they belong in your life. It changes the entire read on every photograph, every article. Adrian stared at him. You want me to what? He said flatly. Hire a date. I want you to consider a structured arrangement with someone trustworthy who understands the business context and is willing to help maintain a particular public image for a defined period of time. There would be compensation, Marcus, and full legal protection, a proper NDA, a clear contract, a defined end date. I'm not suggesting anything. Where, Adrian said carefully, would we even find someone like that? Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he opened his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a message thread. My cousin, Marcus said. She lives in our district. I talked to her last night. She doesn't know details, just the broad strokes. She's trustworthy, she's smart, she's not connected to our industry in any way, and she needs... He stopped. She's going through a difficult financial period. I told her I might know someone who needed help with something unusual. She was open to hearing more. Adrian looked at the phone. He looked at the document on the screen. He looked at his hands on the table. He thought about Lily eating cereal and explaining amphibian taxonomy at 6:45 in the morning, and about what it would mean if he lost the company vote. And about Dalton Reeves sitting in this building right now, probably feeling very confident about how the next 4 weeks were going to go. Set up the meeting, he said. Emma had never been to this part of the city. She'd been to the city. Obviously, she'd lived here for 6 years. But she'd never had a reason to visit the 43rd floor of a building made of glass and pale steel in a financial district neighborhood where the coffee shops charged $9 for a latte and the people on the sidewalk all seemed to walk at a particular pace that said, I have somewhere important to be. Marcus Webb had called her the previous afternoon. He'd been professional on the phone, careful with his words in a way that made her feel like every sentence had been reviewed by a lawyer before he said it. He told her that he worked for a private individual who needed a very specific kind of assistance, professional, discreet, temporary, and that there would be compensation discussed at the meeting. He had not told her who the individual was. Emma looked it up herself the night before. Marcus Webb, Chief of Staff, Cole Technologies. She typed Cole Technologies into her search bar, and the first result was a Forbes profile from 2 years ago with a photograph of Adrian Cole standing in a rooftop space with his arms crossed and a look on his face that said he'd agreed to the photo shoot but hadn't enjoyed it. She sat on her kitchen floor. The chair at her table had a bad leg, and she'd never gotten around to fixing it, and read the profile twice. Then she read 3 more articles. Then she found a piece in a tech magazine about Coal Technology's Shanghai deal that had been published just that morning, and the word isolated appeared in the second paragraph, and she understood approximately what kind of help they were looking for. She set an alarm for 5:15 because she had her diner shift first, and she thought about it all night. This is insane, she thought at one point, lying on her back staring at the ceiling while the radiator clanked. But you need the money, said the other part of her brain, the practical part, the part that had been doing math for the past 8 hours. This is still insane. Yes, but how insane? She thought about that for a while. Then she went to sleep. The meeting was at 11. She left the diner at 10:30 with her uniform still on because she hadn't had time to change, and she walked the 6 blocks because she wasn't going to spend $4 on a bus fare for a meeting that might be nothing. She took the elevator to the 43rd floor. The receptionist asked her name, made a call, and gestured toward a seating area that had furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary. Emma sat on the edge of one of the chairs and looked at the view through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below her, and from up here it looked clean and organized, like a plan. From down there it mostly felt like chaos. A door opened. Marcus Webb came out. She recognized him from the website, followed by Adrian Cole. She stood up. She was suddenly acutely aware that she was wearing a diner uniform with a small ketchup stain on the sleeve that she'd thought was barely visible but now felt enormous, and that her shoes were the pair she'd been wearing for 2 years and the left sole was starting to separate at the toe. Adrian Cole looked at her with an expression that was careful and neutral and gave nothing away. He was taller than the photographs made him look. He had dark circles under his eyes that expensive lighting had apparently concealed in every press image she'd ever seen. His suit was excellent. He was not what she'd expected, which was she hadn't known what she'd expected. Someone who looked more like a concept, maybe. More like a category. Billionaire was not a look she'd been able to picture on a real human face. He looked tired. That was the thing that surprised her most. He just looked tired. "Ms. Hart," he said, "I appreciate you coming in." I appreciate the invitation," she said, because it felt like the right register. And then she added, before she could stop herself, "I took the bus. The building's very tall." There was a silence. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement. Something more careful than that. "It is," he agreed. "Would you like to sit down?" They sat across from each other in a conference room, Marcus at the end of the table, and Adrian explained the situation without making her feel like she was being interviewed for a role in a con. He was direct. He didn't dress it up. "My company is facing a specific political challenge from inside my own board," he said. "Someone is running a narrative that I'm personally unstable, isolated, erratic, not fully engaged. The goal is to undermine confidence before a critical vote next month. The best counter to that narrative is visual evidence that contradicts it. Photographs, appearances, the impression of a personal life that is..." He stopped. "Normal?" Emma offered. "Grounded," he said. "I have a daughter. I work constantly. I don't attend social events unless forced. All of that is true, and in a different context, it's just who I am, but in this context, someone is using it to tell a story about me that isn't accurate." "What would the arrangement look like?" Emma asked. He glanced at Marcus, who had a folder ready. 3 to 4 public appearances over the next 4 weeks. A company dinner, a conference, potentially 1 or 2 smaller events. You would accompany me. We would maintain a comfortable and plausible public presence. Nothing that makes either of us uncomfortable. At every event, you would have a full briefing beforehand. You'd know who's in the room and why they matter. And you'd have the ability to set parameters on anything that doesn't feel right. Emma looked at the folder. "And the compensation?" Another glance between them. Marcus opened the folder to a specific page and slid it toward her. She looked at the number. She looked at it for 2 full seconds without reacting. "Per month?" she asked. "For the duration," Adrian said, "plus a retainer for any additional time commitment beyond the scheduled events. And obviously all expenses, transport, wardrobe, anything required for the appearances." Emma put the paper flat on the table. She thought about Greta's face that morning, the specific quality of her apology. She thought about the radiator. She thought about $14.20 a month rent and $480 left over. She thought about how she'd gotten the communications degree because she'd wanted to tell stories, real stories, and she'd somehow ended up wiping down a counter in a diner at 30 years old, and she was so tired that sometimes on the bus home she couldn't remember which stop was hers. "I have two conditions," she said. Adrian raised an eyebrow. He hadn't been expecting conditions, she could tell. "One, I keep my jobs. I don't want to be financially dependent on this arrangement beyond what we agree to here. I'll work around the schedule, but I keep my jobs." "Reasonable," he said. "Two, if at any point I feel that something being asked of me is inappropriate, personally, professionally, any way, I say so and we renegotiate or I walk. No pressure, no penalty." He studied her for a moment, not calculating, more like he was adjusting an earlier assessment of who she was. "Also reasonable," he said. "Then I have one question." "Ask it." "Why me?" she said. "I mean, specifically. I understand why you want someone without a public profile, someone outside your industry. But Marcus has a cousin who works in the financial district. That's not hard to find. Why me specifically?" There was a pause. Marcus looked at the table. Adrian said, "Marcus told me you'd worked 3 jobs simultaneously for the past 8 months to keep yourself financially stable after a difficult period. He said you'd never asked anyone for help." Emma said nothing. "I needed someone I could trust with real information about a real crisis," Adrian continued. "Trust is easier to extend to someone who understands what it means to hold something together when everything is trying to fall apart." He paused. "That's as honest as I can be about it." It wasn't flattery. He'd said it the way you say a fact. Emma looked down at the folder on the table. She looked at the number again. She looked up. "Okay," she said. "Yeah." They signed the contracts that afternoon. The legal team had prepared a document that was genuinely comprehensive, NDA, terms of the arrangement, payment schedule, clauses about mutual discretion, and conduct parameters. Emma read every page. The lawyer on the other side of the table, a woman named Priya, with excellent posture, and a polite but clear implication that this was the most unusual contract she'd prepared in recent memory, did not comment on the amount of time Emma spent reading. Adrian, for his part, sat at the other end of the table with his laptop open, reviewing what appeared to be a completely different set of documents, occasionally writing in the margins of a printed report. He didn't hover or push. He let her read. She signed. He signed. Priya collected the copies. It was done. In the elevator on the way down, Marcus had stayed upstairs, and it was just the two of them. There was an extremely long pause while the floors counted down from 43. "I have a daughter," Adrian said, as if continuing a conversation that hadn't happened. "Her name is Lily. She's 7. She'll be at some of these events? Not all of them, but you should know she exists." "What's she like?" Emma asked. He seemed surprised by the question, like he'd expected something more logistical. "Loud opinions," he said. "About amphibians, mostly." "Amphibians specifically. Frogs in particular. She has a stuffed frog named Senator. She chose the name herself." Emma almost laughed. She stopped herself, not because it wasn't funny, but because she wasn't sure yet where the lines were. "Okay," she said instead. "Good to know." The elevator opened on the ground floor lobby. Outside, the financial district moved at its particular purposeful pace. Emma looked at it through the glass doors and thought about how, until about 4 hours ago, she had been wiping down a counter and getting 8 hours of sleep on a good night and managing one crisis at a time. "Do you need a car?" Adrian asked. "I'm going to the dry cleaners. It's 6 blocks east." He looked at her for a moment. "I'll have Marcus send you the briefing for next week's dinner. It's Thursday. Is that—" "I'll move my shift," she said. She pushed through the glass doors. The city was cold and loud and entirely indifferent to what had just happened. She put her head down and walked east, and she told herself very clearly and carefully that this was a transaction. It was only a transaction. That was all it was. The briefing document arrived in her email at 8 o'clock that evening, while she was eating soup that was mostly broth and half an English muffin, and it was 42 pages long. She stared at it. She opened it. The first section was a company overview. Coal Technologies, a summary of the Shanghai deal, the key players on the opposing board faction, the investor relationships that were currently most at risk. It was written in clear, professional language with no technical jargon, clearly designed to get a non-specialist up to speed fast. Someone had thought carefully about what she would and wouldn't know going in. The second section was the guest list for Thursday's dinner. Zhang Industries representatives, 3 board members who were currently considered persuadable, 2 technology journalists whose coverage had been trending negative, and a collection of investors and partners whose presence was either strategic or unavoidable. The third section was the most detailed. It was about Adrian. Not a PR profile. An actual profile. Preferences, habits, the way he operated in social situations, what he was good at, small group conversations, technical depth, being direct, and what he wasn't good at, working a room, small talk about anything that wasn't work, pretending to be more relaxed than he was. There were notes on Lily, a photograph of them from what appeared to be a family event, a note that said he doesn't usually discuss his late wife, but won't get upset if it comes up. He'll redirect. Emma sat with the 42 pages for a long time. Then she went to her laptop and typed Adrian Cole into the search bar again, and this time she read everything she could find. The early company profiles, the tech pieces, the one interview he had given around the time Helena died. Brief, controlled, the interviewer clearly wanting more and Adrian clearly not giving it. The photograph from that interview was a black and white candid, Adrian coming out of a building, a woman's coat on his arm that was clearly not his. He'd been getting her things out of storage, the caption said, a month after she died. Emma looked at the photograph for a moment, then she closed the tab. She went back to the briefing document and started taking notes on a legal pad she'd bought 3 years ago and was still only halfway through. Zhang Industries, primary contact is Richard Zhang, early 50s, prefers directness to formality. Don't mention the competitor deal from 2021. Board members. Michael Ortega is on the fence. Pay attention to how he reacts when Adrian speaks. Don't engage him on policy directly. He likes to feel like he's forming his own conclusions. Journalists. Carla Voss will ask personal questions if given an opening. Keep answers warm but general. She wrote for an hour and a half. She made a list of questions she needed Marcus to answer before Thursday. She thought about what she'd wear and then thought about how she didn't own anything that belonged in a room where the catering probably cost more than her monthly rent. She was going to need to mention the wardrobe thing. She sent Marcus an email at 9:45. At 9:48, he replied with a calendar link and the name of a stylist. She lay in bed that night with the legal pad on her chest, and the radiator clanked, and she thought about the photograph of the man coming out of the building with a dead woman's coat on his arm. Transaction, she told herself. That's all this is. The radiator clanked again. She stared at the ceiling. Sleep came eventually. It always did, but it took longer than she expected. Thursday arrived the way important things usually do. Faster than you're ready for, and with less warning than you think you'll get. The stylist, a woman named Dominique who communicated exclusively in decisive pronouncements and had opinions about Emma's posture that she shared without being asked, dressed her in a deep emerald dress that Emma would never have chosen for herself, and that turned out to be exactly right. The shoes were borrowed from a curated collection, Dominique explained, that clients could use for events and fit almost perfectly, except for a small tightness at the left heel that Emma decided she could live with. Stop pulling at the neckline, Patty, Dominique said without looking up from the accessory tray. I'm not pulling it. You were about to. Emma put her hand down. The car picked her up at 6:15. She was alone in the back seat for 4 minutes until it stopped in front of Adrian's building, and then Adrian got in, and for a moment they sat in the same vehicle for the first time since the elevator, and the silence had a very specific texture. He looked at her. You look... He paused, apparently editing something. You look like you belong in that room. Is that a compliment or a mission briefing? Both, he said. He wasn't trying to be charming. He was just being direct, which was somehow more disarming. You read the briefing, he said. It wasn't a question. All 42 pages. I have questions. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded card. I had Marcus prepare a condensed version with the critical points flagged. I thought it might be useful in the car. She took it. You prepared a condensed version of the briefing that was already a condensed version. The original was 112 pages. Emma stared at him. I do thorough work, he said. I can see that. She unfolded the card. He looked out the window. They traveled for 11 minutes, and she read, and neither of them spoke much, and it wasn't as uncomfortable as she'd expected. He didn't fill silences just to fill them. She hadn't anticipated that about him. She'd expected. She wasn't sure. More performance, maybe? More management. He just sat there, thinking about something she couldn't see, and let her read in peace. Outside the venue, there were photographers. Not many. It wasn't that kind of event. But enough. 3, 4. Standing at the edge of the approach with cameras and a professional patience. The car stopped. The door opened. Adrian stepped out first and then turned back and offered his hand, and Emma took it and stepped out, and the cameras clicked, and she thought, okay, this is what it is. This is the part where you do the thing you agreed to do. She smiled at nothing in particular, because smiling at photographers directly looked rehearsed. Adrian's hand was at the small of her back, light, not possessive, just present. Good? He said quietly, for her alone. Good, she said. They walked in. The dinner was held in a private event space on the 20th floor of a hotel that Emma had walked past probably 100 times without ever once imagining she'd be inside it. The room was full of exactly the kind of people she'd read about in the briefing. Careful, successful, measuring everything while appearing to measure nothing. It was a room full of people who had learned to make calculation look like ease, and it was, she would reflect later, one of the most exhausting environments she'd ever been in. Not because anyone was cruel, but because the weight of all that unsaid assessment pressed down on everything. Richard Jang was the first person they approached. He was warm and direct, as the briefing had promised. A man who'd built something real and didn't feel the need to remind you of it. He shook Adrian's hand and then looked at Emma with genuine curiosity, not the assessing kind, but the interested kind. "And you are?" he asked. Adrian opened his mouth. Emma stepped in smoothly, not cutting him off, just meeting the moment. "Emma," she said, "I've been following the Zhang Industries partnership news. Your infrastructure development work in Southeast Asia is remarkable." Zhang raised an eyebrow, not in surprise at what she'd said, but at the fact that she knew to say it. "You're familiar with the work?" he said. "I've read the coverage, the desalination project especially. The way you structured the community partnership component is not what most companies do." They talked for 8 minutes. Emma knew because she'd privately counted. By the 3rd minute, Richard Jang had turned his body slightly toward her in a way that meant he was genuinely engaged. By the 5th minute, he was referencing Adrian directly in the conversation, which was the point, pulling Adrian into a dialogue rather than an interrogation. At the 8-minute mark, they moved on, and Adrian said quietly, near her ear as they turned toward the next group, "Where did you learn about the desalination project?" The briefing mentioned the Southeast Asia infrastructure work. "I did my own reading Wednesday night." He didn't say anything for a moment. "That wasn't in the 42 pages, he said. "I know," she said. They moved through the room. She watched Michael Ortega, the persuadable board member, mid-50s, a careful listener who nodded at the right moments but never committed. And when she got close enough to speak with him, she let him lead the conversation, let him bring up the Shanghai deal first, agreed with his framing before she complicated it. He left the interaction looking like he'd made up his own mind about something, which was exactly what she'd intended. Carla Voss, the journalist, was harder. She was good at her job, which meant she was good at exactly the thing Emma needed to manage. "You two seem comfortable together," Voss said, with a smile that was professional and completely transparent about what it was doing. "We are," Emma said, simply. "How long have you—" "Carla!" Adrian appeared at Emma's shoulder, a glass of water in his hand, his timing exact. "Have you met Richard Zhang? He was just telling me about a policy paper his team published last month. I think it overlaps with some of your recent coverage." It was smooth. It was so smooth that Emma suspected he'd been in position for 30 seconds, watching, waiting for the right moment to redirect. Voss looked briefly frustrated and then professional again, and let herself be steered toward Zhang, and Emma exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said. "You were handling it," he said. "I know, but the assist was good." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before it disappeared. The dinner ran until 10:30. The car ride back was quieter than the one there. A different kind of quiet, the exhausted, productive kind. Ortega's shifting, Adrian said at one point, looking out the window. I watched him for most of the night. He's moving. He's not fully there yet, Emma said. He had a moment around the dessert course where he double-checked something on his phone. Whatever he was looking at complicated his thinking. Adrian turned toward her slowly. You clocked that from across the room. I was watching, she said. That was the job. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you're good at this. I'm good at reading people, she said. I've been doing it in customer service for 8 years. You learn fast when you need tips to cover rent. Came out more honest than she'd intended. She didn't edit it. He didn't offer sympathy, which she appreciated. He just nodded, like it was information he was filing. What's your rent? He asked. She looked at him. Why? Calibrating, he said. So I understand what the compensation context is. 1420, she said. Studio. The heat makes noise. What kind of noise? Like something's inside the wall deciding whether to escape. This time he actually did smile. It was brief and it changed his face considerably. He turned back to the window before she could study it too long. The next appearance is in 10 days, he said, returning to business. The Harbison Tech Conference. It's a full day. I'll need to swap a shift. Marcus will handle anything that needs to be covered financially. That's not what I meant, she said. I mean, I'll need to let Greta know in advance. It's not about money. It's about not leaving her short. Another pause. Right, he said. Of course. The car stopped in front of her building. She picked up her small purse, borrowed, like the shoes, and put her hand on the door. Emma, he said. She turned. You were... He stopped, restarted. Tonight went better than I expected. That's good, she said. I expected it to go reasonably well, he clarified, like he didn't want her to think the bar had been low. It went better than that. She looked at him for a moment. In the dark of the car, the tiredness in his face was very visible, and something else that she couldn't quite name. Something that wasn't the public Adrian Cole from the Forbes profile. Something that was just a man who had been managing a crisis for weeks and was, for approximately 90 seconds in a car outside a woman's apartment building, not managing anything. Get some sleep, she said. She got out of the car. The radiator was clanking when she got upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed in the borrowed shoes and the emerald dress, and she didn't move for several minutes. She thought about the 42 pages. She thought about the photograph of the coat. She thought about the way he'd said you were good at this, like he'd needed to say it out loud before he could fully believe it. She thought about how she'd told herself this was a transaction. She was still telling herself that when she finally fell asleep. But the conviction was already, quietly, starting to crack. 10 days passed the way 10 days do when you're managing 2 lives at once, in fragments, in transitions, in the 7-minute gaps between one thing ending and another beginning. Emma kept her shifts. She'd promised herself she would, and she did, which meant that the Tuesday after the Thursday dinner, she was back behind the counter at the diner by 6 in the morning, handing instant coffee to the man in the gray blazer, who had apparently decided this was his regular table now, and listening to Greta argue with a produce supplier over the phone in the back. The emerald dress was in a dry cleaning bag hanging on the back of her bathroom door. The borrowed shoes were in a box on her shelf. The legal pad with her notes from the briefing was on her kitchen table, and every time she sat down to eat, she could see her own handwriting. Ortega. Watching. Don't push. She didn't tell anyone about the arrangement. There was nobody to tell, really. She'd let most of her friendships thin out over the past 2 years without fully meaning to. That happened when you worked 3 jobs and your social energy hovered consistently around 0. There was her coworker Josie at the diner, who was 22 and genuinely warm and asked too many questions in the good-natured way of someone who hadn't yet learned that some answers make things complicated. And there was her mother in Dayton, who called on Sunday mornings and talked about the neighbors and never asked directly how Emma was doing because she was afraid of the answer. You sound tired, her mother said that Sunday. I'm okay. Are you eating? Yes. Because last time you said you were okay, you'd lost 8 pounds. I'm eating, Mom. A pause. The particular kind that meant her mother was deciding whether to push. She decided not to. She never pushed anymore, and Emma couldn't decide if that was kindness or a form of giving up. I might have some extra work coming up, Emma said, so finances should be less. She stopped. Better. For a while. What kind of work? Consulting, Emma said, which was technically not a lie. Her mother said that was good and asked about the weather and didn't ask any more questions. And Emma sat on the floor of her kitchen after they hung up and thought about how much of her actual life she'd become incapable of explaining to anyone. The briefing for the Harbison Tech Conference arrived on Monday, 58 pages this time, with a handwritten note at the top of the cover page that said, "The condensed version is attached at the back. AC." She smiled before she could stop herself. She read both versions. The Harbison Tech Conference was different from the dinner in almost every way. The dinner had been controlled. A private room, a curated guest list, clear beginning and end. The conference was a full-day event held in a convention center that took up most of a city block, with panel discussions and networking breaks and lunch sessions, and a keynote address that Adrian was scheduled to deliver in the afternoon. There were easily 400 people moving through the space at any given time, and the cameras, both professional press and the ambient documentation of 400 people with phones, were everywhere. Emma had been to conferences before. Communications conferences, small ones, in the 2 years after college when she'd still believed her degree was pointing toward something. She knew the specific social physics of them, the way everyone was simultaneously looking for connection and performing availability, the exhausting calculus of every interaction that was never quite casual even when it pretended to be. This one operated on a different scale. The stakes were written on people's faces. Marcus met them at the venue entrance at 8:45 and handed both of them updated schedules, made eye contact with Emma in a way that communicated "you're doing well, keep doing it," and then disappeared into the crowd to manage 17 other things simultaneously. Adrian had the particular focused stillness of someone who had been in rooms like this many times and had a system for surviving them. He said hello to people efficiently. He remembered names that he clearly hadn't encountered in months. He navigated the politics of who to speak to first and who to let come to him with a precision that Emma found herself watching more than she'd expected. He wasn't warm in this way that some powerful people performed warmth. The big handshake, the eye contact held a beat too long, the remembered personal detail deployed with theatrical precision. He was just present, paying attention. When he talked to someone, he talked to them, and the lack of performance was somehow more commanding than the performance would have been. She stayed close. That was the arrangement. Not attached at his side, not managed and positioned like a prop, but genuinely near, within reach, clearly with him, easy to include in a conversation, but not demanding to be. It took about 40 minutes for the first thing to go sideways. His name was Preston Haig, and he was a venture capitalist in his early 50s with the specific brand of confidence that grows in a person when they've been in rooms full of people who want something from them for long enough. He found Adrian during the first networking break near the coffee station and shook his hand with the controlled grip of someone reminding you of something. "Cole, good to see you out in the world." He said it lightly, like a joke. It wasn't a joke. People were starting to wonder. "I'm generally somewhere," Adrian said. Sure. Haig's eyes slid to Emma, then back to Adrian. "This the famous Ms. Hart?" The word famous landed wrong. It implied she'd been discussed, which was fine. That was the point. But the way he said it implied something more specific, something that wanted to see how they'd react to it. "Emma Hart," she said, extending her hand before Adrian could do anything. "Preston Haig, you led the Series B for Quantum Meridian last year, the environmental sensor startup." Haig shook her hand, surprised. "I did. I followed that deal. The environmental compliance angle was smart. Got you into markets the traditional tech investors were ignoring." He looked at her with an expression that recalculated. Then he looked at Adrian and then back at Emma, and whatever he'd been planning to do with the conversation, he adjusted. They talked for 12 minutes. By the end, Haig was addressing her directly about a third of the time, which was more than she'd expected and probably more than he'd intended. When he moved on, he shook both their hands, and his manner was different in a way that was hard to quantify but real. You researched him, Adrian said quietly, once Haig was gone. I researched everyone on the attendee list. He looked at her. The list has 240 names. I prioritized, she said. 50 names. The ones Marcus flagged, the ones I thought might be relevant, and the ones who've written or said anything publicly about Cole Technologies in the past 6 months. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's... and stopped. What? Nothing. He said it too quickly. Say it. I was going to say that's more preparation than most of my executive team puts in for these events, and then I stopped because it sounded... He paused. Reductive. Like I was surprised you'd be capable. You were surprised, she said, without heat. Yes, he admitted. I was adjusting. She appreciated that. The honesty of it, without the defensive layer most people added. What were you expecting? Someone who would be good at the public appearances without being genuinely interested in the content. I spent 8 years in customer service, she said. You either stay curious or you go insane. I stayed curious. He didn't say anything to that, but he didn't look away either, and after a moment he turned toward the next group of people they needed to approach, and she fell into step beside him, and something between them had shifted by approximately 5 degrees. Not dramatically, not visibly, but it had shifted. So, the keynote was at 2 in the afternoon. Emma sat in the 4th row because Marcus had thought front row positioning looked staged, and from there she watched Adrian Cole stand at a podium in front of 300 people and do the thing he was actually built for. He spoke without notes for 38 minutes. Not in the loosely structured way of someone who'd given a speech so many times they could coast on autopilot, but in the sharp, connected way of someone who had thought about the subject for a long time and was organizing the thinking in real time. He talked about the future of healthcare data management without making it sound like a sales pitch. He talked about regulatory challenges without making it sound like a complaint. He talked about failure, 2 specific product failures from Cole Technologies' early years, with the matter-of-fact candor of someone who had decided that pretending failure hadn't happened was a waste of everyone's time. The audience was attentive in a way that audiences at conferences weren't always attentive. They weren't just listening, they were leaning in. Emma had read about his speaking ability in 2 separate profiles. She'd filed the information without quite believing it, because people wrote flattering things about successful people at a certain level as a matter of course. But watching it in person, she understood. He wasn't performing conviction. He just had it. And in a room full of people who spent their days managing perception, the absence of performance was almost startling. He found her in the audience once, briefly, not scanning for reassurance, just a quick check that read more like taking inventory of the room. Their eyes met for about 2 seconds. She gave him a small nod. He moved on. Afterward, in the green room while he took questions from a smaller group of journalists and executives, Emma was standing near the side wall with a glass of water when a woman appeared beside her. Mid-40s, elegant, with the self-contained presence of someone who'd chosen to be exactly as visible as they wanted to be and not a degree more. You're Emma Hart, the woman said. I am. Diana Fell. I'm on the nominating committee for the Harbison Foundation Board. She offered her hand. I've been watching you work this room all day. Emma kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure I'd call it working. Diana Fell smiled. That's why it works. She glanced toward where Adrian was fielding questions. He's better today than I've seen him in a year. That's not a small thing. She looked back at Emma. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. She moved off before Emma could respond, and Emma stood with her water glass and thought about that for a moment. Whatever you're doing. She wasn't sure herself what exactly that was anymore. The lunch break had produced one complication that Emma was still processing by the time the car came to take them home. She'd been sitting at a table with Marcus and 2 of the Cole Technologies communication staff, eating a sandwich that was better than it had any right to be at a conference, when a man she didn't recognize sat down across from her with the specific air of someone who'd been waiting for an opening. He was around 60, with a round, carefully maintained face and small eyes that moved differently from his expression. His expression was friendly. His eyes were evaluating. Ms. Hart, he said, I don't believe we've been introduced. Dalton Reeves. She'd read his name enough times in the past 2 weeks that hearing it out loud produced a very specific internal reaction, which she managed to keep entirely off her face. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "are you enjoying the conference?" "Very much." He picked up a bread roll from the basket in the center of the table, as if they'd been sitting together for 20 minutes. Adrian's speech was impressive, as always. He's a remarkable communicator when he's... He paused, a small pause that was doing a lot of work. "When he's in good form." Marcus had gone very still at the other end of the table. "He seemed in excellent form to me," Emma said pleasantly. "Of course," Reeves smiled. "It's wonderful to see him with company. He tends to be, I say this with genuine affection, quite solitary. I've worried about him." "That's kind of you," Emma said. "He doesn't always let people in. Understandably, given everything he's been through." His eyes were steady on her. "How long have you two known each other?" "Long enough," she said. The slight pause, the small recalibration behind his eyes. "Of course. I won't pry." He picked up his water glass. "I just want to say, and I hope you'll take this in the spirit it's intended, that people who care about Adrian need to be aware that his position is quite delicate right now. There are forces at work that he may not fully appreciate. It would be a shame if the people around him were caught off guard." It was a warning dressed as concern. She could hear every layer of it clearly. He was telling her that he knew the situation wasn't what it appeared, or that he suspected, and he was seeing whether she'd react. She held his gaze and smiled and said, "I appreciate you sharing that. He's lucky to have board members looking out for him." Something moved behind Reeves' eyes, not quite frustration, more like a recalculation. "Indeed," he said. He stood. "Lovely to meet you, Ms. Hart." He left. Emma sat very still for 3 seconds. Then she picked up her sandwich and took a bite and chewed and swallowed and said, without looking at Marcus, "I need to tell Adrian about that conversation today. Not tonight, before the next event." "Agreed," Marcus said quietly. She ate the rest of her sandwich. Her hand was perfectly steady, and she was faintly proud of that. Pause. In the car on the way back, she told Adrian about Reeves. She didn't editorialize. She recounted the conversation as close to verbatim as she could manage, including the pauses, the tone, the specific quality of forces at work, said by a man who was himself one of the forces in question. Adrian listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change much, but she'd gotten better at reading him over the past 10 days, and she caught the specific tightening around his eyes that meant something was being processed at a level below the surface. When she finished, he said, "What did you make of him?" "He's testing what I know," she said, "or what I'm willing to say. He's not sure yet whether I'm actually close to you or whether this is..." She stopped. "Whether it's what it is," he said. "Yes." He looked out the window. "You handled it well. I told him you were lucky to have board members looking out for you." The corner of his mouth moved. "That's almost offensive." "I know. I meant it to sting just a little." He turned back from the window. The almost smile had settled into something quieter, something that wasn't quite amusement but was related to it. "He's going to keep watching," Adrian said. "Now that he's made contact, he'll use every event to gather information." "I know." "It complicates..." "I know," she said again. "It means we have to be more consistent, not just in public. If he has anyone watching for inconsistencies, how we talk about each other in separate conversations, what we do or don't know about each other, there can't be gaps." He was quiet for a moment. "That requires more coordination." "Yes." Another pause. The city moved past the windows. "Would you be willing to spend some time outside the scheduled events, building out the background, so there are no gaps?" She understood what he was asking. More time, less structured, the edges of the arrangement getting less distinct. "Yes," she said. "That makes sense." It would be... He paused, visibly uncomfortable, which she'd come to recognize as his version of sincerity. "It doesn't have to be elaborate. Coffee, an afternoon, enough to know the basic things people who are close know about each other." "I'll need to know more about Lily," she said. He blinked. That had surprised him. "If Reeves or anyone like him asks me about your daughter," she said, And I can't answer naturally. That's a gap. Right. He said it slowly. Yes. So, tell me about her. He looked at her as if the request had temporarily reset his operating system. Then he looked at the seat back in front of him, and something in his posture changed. Not relaxed exactly, but the particular tension that was his professional default loosened by a degree. She started refusing to go to sleep last month, he said. She discovered that if she asked me a question right when I'm about to leave the room, I always stay to answer it. So now every night there's a question. Sometimes it's about frogs. Last week it was about whether trains dream. Emma looked at him. What did you say? I said I didn't know. She said that wasn't an answer. I said I thought if trains dreamed, they probably dreamed about going somewhere they'd never been. He paused. She said that was sad. I thought it was kind of nice. Emma said nothing for a moment. Then, how long did you stay in the room? Another 20 minutes, he said. She fell asleep mid-sentence about subway systems. The car was quiet. Outside, the evening had settled into the particular amber of streetlights beginning to outnumber daylight, and Emma looked at the side of his face and thought about a man sitting on the edge of a 7-year-old's bed for an extra 20 minutes because she'd asked him whether trains had dreams. She sounds like a lot, Emma said. She's everything, he said simply. Then he caught himself as if he hadn't meant to say it quite like that. He stopped trying to revise it. Yes, she is. They met for coffee that Saturday. Not at his office. Marcus had suggested a cafe in a neighborhood that was public, but not the kind of public that produced photographs. Residential area, local crowd, the kind of place where a man and a woman having coffee were just a man and a woman having coffee. Emma was there first. She ordered a plain coffee and sat at a table by the window and watched the street because she always did that, always had a view of the entrance of wherever she was, a habit she'd developed in years of eating alone and needing something to do with her eyes. He came in 7 minutes after the agreed time, which she'd come to understand was Adrian's standard, not disrespectful, just consistently, mildly late in the way of someone who always believed the prior thing would take less time than it did. He spotted her immediately, came to the table, sat down, and looked at the menu for about 3 seconds before setting it down. Coffee, he told the server. Black. Same as mine, Emma said, which wasn't remarkable, but he glanced at her cup as if it was. They talked for 2.5 hours. Later, she wouldn't be able to reconstruct exactly how they got from the structured background building. Where did you grow up? What was the family situation? What were the significant years? To the conversation they were actually having by the end of it. It happened the way those things happen. In stages, each one seeming reasonable in isolation, until you look up and realize you're somewhere you didn't plan to be. He'd grown up in a medium-sized city in the Pacific Northwest, middle-class family, father who worked in logistics, and had particular opinions about efficiency that had apparently lodged in Adrian's brain at a formative age. A younger sister, Naomi, who was an ER nurse in Portland and who he spoke to every Sunday and described as the most capable person I know, which is saying something given that she grew up with me and I'm difficult. Emma had laughed at that. He'd looked slightly surprised by his own honesty. She told him about Dayton, her mother's house on a street where all the houses looked similar, and she'd spent her childhood trying to figure out what she wanted to do with a life that had so far refused to take a particular shape. She told him about the communications degree, about the year after graduation when she'd actually worked in media, briefly, for a lifestyle magazine that folded after 11 months, and about how the pivot to service work had started as temporary and had somehow become the main story. Do you miss it? He asked. The media work. Sometimes I miss what I thought it was going to be, she said. The actual job was mostly rewriting press releases and arguing with the photo editor about cropping. But yes, I miss the idea that I was going to be telling stories that mattered. He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table. What kind of stories? Real ones, she said. The kind where the ending isn't obvious. He looked up from the cup. The ending of a story is never obvious until it is, he said. That's what makes it worth following. She looked at him. It was one of those moments that arrives unexpectedly. where someone says something that connects, and the connection is real enough that neither party quite knows what to do with it. "What happened to Helena?" she asked. She hadn't planned to ask it. She asked it because they were being honest, and the question was real. "You don't have to tell me, but if I'm asked—" "No," he said. "It's fine." He put the cup down. "Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in January, she died in September. 8 months." He said it factually, the way he might recite a timeline for a project. She understood that was the only way he'd learned to say it without the words breaking apart. "Lily was 2. She doesn't remember her. Not really. She has photographs and things I've told her, and she's very matter-of-fact about it, which is—" He stopped. "I don't know if that's healthy or not. The therapist says it's normal, that children that young build what they know from what they're given, not from what they remember." "Do you talk to Lily about her?" "Yes. Regularly." He paused. "It's the thing I'm most careful about, getting it right. I don't want Helena to be an absence. I want her to be a presence that Lily just hasn't met yet." Emma looked at her coffee. She had nothing useful to say to that, so she didn't say anything, which she'd found was usually better than something that wasn't useful. "She had," Adrian said, and stopped and started again. "Helena had a talent for making people feel immediately like themselves. Not comfortable exactly, just themselves. Like performance was optional." He looked at the window. "It's a rarer thing than it sounds." Emma said nothing. He looked back at her. Then he looked down at the table, and she could see him notice, in real time, that he'd said something he hadn't said to anyone in a long time. "Sorry," he said. "That was—" "Don't apologize," she said. He looked up. "I asked," she said, "and what you said was real. Don't apologize for that." He didn't. But he picked up his coffee cup again, and the conversation shifted, not uncomfortably, but into safer water. And they talked for another 40 minutes about Lily's school and the frog taxonomy, and why Senator the stuffed frog had specifically been named Senator, which turned out to be because Lily had watched a congressional hearing on TV with Mrs. Patterson and decided she liked the way the senators sat very still while people talked at them. "She wants to be a senator," Adrian said. "Or a herpetologist," Emma said, because she'd read enough briefing documents by now to know the word. He stared at her. "I Googled amphibian science careers," she said. "For background." "Emma." He said her name with a kind of careful precision, the way you say something when you're still working out what you want to say after it. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said. "I wanted to." They walked out together, onto a street that was busy with Saturday afternoon and indifferent to who they were. He had his hands in his pockets. She had her bag on her shoulder. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment with that specific awkwardness of a conversation that has run long and doesn't quite know how to end. "Same time next week?" he said. "Before the Meridian event." "Sure." "I'll have Marcus—" "You don't need to have Marcus," she said. "Just text me." He looked at her for a second. "I don't have your number." "Oh." She'd assumed. "Right." She told him her number. He put it in his phone, and she noticed his contacts were organized in a way that looked systematic rather than intuitive, names with tags beside them that were probably organizational, and then she was listed, presumably, Emma Hart. Something. She wondered what the tag said. "I'll see you Thursday," she said. "The Meridian dinner." Thursday. She walked to the bus stop. She didn't look back, which took a moderate amount of discipline. On the bus ride home, she got a text, an unknown number that she added to her contacts immediately. The message said, "Thank you for today." She looked at it for a moment. Then she typed back, "You're welcome. Tell Senator I said hello." 3 minutes passed. Then, "He's currently in session. We'll pass along the message at recess." Emma sat on the bus with her phone face down in her lap and her eyes forward, and a smile she was definitely not trying very hard to suppress. And she thought about the word transaction with something between irony and unease, because it was becoming less accurate by the day, and she was running out of good reasons to keep using it. The Meridian dinner came and went. Then a Sunday afternoon at a museum that Adrian had needed to attend for a foundation obligation, and had asked her to join, which was how Emma ended up standing in front of a large abstract painting that cost more than her apartment building, while a man explained to Adrian why it represented the tension between capital markets and individual aspiration, and Emma kept a very straight face through the entire 8 minutes. Afterward, walking through a less crowded gallery section, she said, "Was that painting actually good?" "No," Adrian said, "but he sold 6 of them at the benefit auction, so—" Capitalism in action. "The tension between capital markets and individual aspiration," he said very seriously, and she laughed out loud. Not a polished, event-appropriate laugh, a real one, the kind she'd mostly stopped doing in public about 2 years ago. And it echoed off the gallery walls, and a passing museum guard gave them a look. Adrian didn't laugh exactly, but the expression on his face when she laughed was the closest thing to open she'd seen from him, and it stayed there for a moment before the usual composure returned. They were building something. She could feel it accumulating, day by day and conversation by conversation, the way you don't notice a structure going up until you stand back and there's a wall where there was nothing before. What she couldn't decide was whether that was part of the arrangement or in spite of it. What she couldn't decide was whether it mattered. But the call from Marcus came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks into the arrangement, while Emma was doing the data entry shift at her kitchen table with her laptop balanced on a stack of library books. "We need you at the office," he said. "Today. This afternoon." She heard something in his voice that made her stop typing. "What happened?" "Something's moving. Adrian wants to brief you in person before it goes anywhere else." A pause. "It's about Reeves." She shut the laptop. "What time?" 3. "Can you make it?" She looked at her shift schedule. She looked at the wall. "I'll be there," she said. She was there at 2:55, which was 5 minutes earlier than she'd ever arrived at the Cole Technologies building, and Marcus met her in the lobby rather than having her go through reception, which told her something about the urgency before anyone had said a word. In the elevator, she asked, "How bad?" Marcus looked at the floor numbers counting up. "He'll explain," he said, "but Emma—" He paused, which he rarely did. "Be ready for it to get harder before it gets easier." The elevator opened on the 43rd floor. She walked down the hall toward the conference room, and through the glass wall she could see Adrian already there, standing rather than sitting, looking at something on the central screen with the posture of someone who has received news and is currently in the stage between receiving it and deciding what to do about it. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her that first day in this same building, carefully, assessing, except it was different now. There was something underneath the assessment, something that might have been relief at having someone to tell it to. "Close the door," he said. She closed the door. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He turned the screen toward her and she looked at what was on it, and she understood immediately why Marcus had told her to be ready. It was a photograph. A surveillance-quality image, grainy and angular the way parking garage cameras always are. 2 figures in a dark space. One of them was clearly Adrian. The other was a woman in a coat with her face turned away from the camera. In the image, Adrian appeared to be handing something to the woman, a package of some kind, indistinct. The image had been sent to 3 financial news outlets within the last hour. The accompanying message described it as evidence of corruption and misconduct. The story hadn't broken yet, but it was about to. Emma looked at the image for a long time without speaking. "When was this taken?" she asked. "Based on metadata. If the metadata hasn't been manipulated, approximately 6 weeks ago, before you and I ever met." "Who's the woman?" "We don't know. The coat's been cropped, and the face is obscured. My security team thinks it may have been done deliberately." He said it flatly. "Someone is going to say it's you." Emma looked up from the screen. "They don't have to prove it," he said. "They just have to suggest it. In the current news cycle, suggestion is enough to do damage before any correction can catch up." She sat with that for a moment. The weight of it was specific and physical, like a change in air pressure. "What was in the package?" she asked. "I don't know what photograph they've manipulated," he said, "or whether it's completely fabricated. I need my security team to go through the past 6 months of garage footage." "How long will that take?" "Days? We may not have days." He looked at the screen. "The board vote is in 12 days. 12 days? Emma did the math she always did. The kind where you count what you have and measure it against what you need and try to find the number where those two things meet. Reeves, she said. Almost certainly. He has the resources and the motivation and… Adrian stopped. And I should have moved faster against him. I knew this was coming and I waited for it to come to me. You were building a case, Emma said. I was being careful. There's a difference between careful and slow, and I misjudged it. She looked at him. He wasn't asking for reassurance. He was stating a mistake with the same flat accuracy he brought to everything else, and it was one of the things about him that she'd found most consistently disarming, the willingness to own the thing without the performance of self-flagellation. Okay, she said. What do we do? He looked at her. She'd said we without thinking about it, and they both heard it, and neither of them acknowledged it directly, and it settled into the air between them like something that had been true for a while and was only now being named. We find the truth of that photograph, he said, before they get to write the story themselves. She nodded once. Then let's start. Outside the glass wall of the conference room, the 43rd floor moved with its usual controlled purpose, people carrying things to places, things getting done. None of them knew yet that the careful architecture of the past 3 weeks had just cracked along a fault line that someone else had placed there deliberately. But inside the room, two people who had started as strangers and had become, without quite deciding to, something considerably more complicated. They knew. And they were already moving. The story broke at 6:47 the following morning. Emma knew the exact time because she was already awake, had been awake since 4:30 when her brain had decided that sleep was no longer a viable option, and she was sitting at her kitchen table with her third coffee and her laptop open to a news aggregator when the first alert hit. Then the second. Then, within 11 minutes, 4 more. The headline that spread fastest was from a financial news outlet called Market Wire, a site that sat in the uncomfortable middle ground between legitimate journalism and strategic information placement, credible enough to be cited, flexible enough to be used. The headline read, Coal Technologies Board Crisis, Exclusive Photo Raises Misconduct Questions Ahead of Critical Vote. The photograph was worse in publication than it had been on the conference room screen. Someone had cropped it, adjusted the contrast, added a red circle around the exchange of the package. The image had been optimized for maximum implication. The woman in the coat was still faceless, still turned away, but the cropping made her look deliberately hidden rather than incidentally obscured, which was a different story entirely. Emma read the article twice, then the 3 that followed. They all sourced from the same anonymous tip, the same image, the same vague language. Sources indicate, questions have been raised. The nature of the exchange remains unclear. Nobody alleged anything specific. They didn't need to. The photograph and the timing did the work. She texted Adrian at 7:03. I've seen it. How are you? 3 minutes passed, then functional. Can you come in at 9? She moved her diner shift. Greta, who had the particular gift of knowing when not to ask questions, simply said okay and hung up. And Emma got on the bus with her bag and her notebook and the very specific feeling of a situation accelerating past the point where caution is still the primary strategy. The 43rd floor was different that morning. She noticed it as soon as the elevator opened. The quality of movement had changed. People were moving faster and with less of the controlled purpose she'd observed before. There were more people in the hallways than she'd seen on previous visits. 2 of them were lawyers she recognized from the contract signing. Others were faces she didn't know, moving with the purposeful urgency of people who'd been called in. Marcus met her at the elevator. He had the look of someone who'd been awake since at least 3. Legal team is in the East Conference Room, he said, already walking. Security team has pulled the garage footage, all of it, 6 months back. Adrian's on a call with the communications director that should wrap in 10 minutes. What's the investor response? 3 calls this morning wanting clarification. 2 from board members. He paused. 1 from Ortega. Emma processed that. Ortega, the persuadable one, the one she'd watched all evening at the Zhang dinner. If he was calling, he was worried. If he was worried, he was movable in either direction. What did Ortega say? He said he was concerned and wanted to speak with Adrian directly before the week was out. Marcus glanced at her. That's not a no, but it's not a yes. What's being said about the woman in the photograph? Marcus was quiet for half a second, which was enough. They're implying it's you, she said. No one said it directly, he said. But there's a thread on 2 financial forums starting to circulate the theory, and Carla Voss, the journalist from the Harbison conference, posted on her professional account this morning asking whether anyone had additional context about the image. Emma felt the specific coldness of being the subject of a story you had no control over. It was different from any other kind of exposure she'd experienced. It had a weight to it, a momentum that didn't care about what was true. She's fishing, Emma said. Yes, which means she doesn't have the confirmation yet, which means we have a window. He stopped outside the main conference room. Adrian wants to talk to you before we brief the full team. He opened the door and then stepped back, giving her the room. Adrian was standing by the window with his phone in his hand, and he looked up when she came in, and for a moment he didn't say anything. He just looked at her with the expression of a man who was managing approximately 16 serious problems simultaneously and was allowing himself for a brief interval to stop managing. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question surprised her. She'd expected to be briefed, updated, given a role in a plan. She hadn't expected to be asked how she was. "I'm fine," she said. "I've been worse." He looked at her like he didn't quite believe that, but respected the answer. "The photograph is a composite," he said. "Our security team confirmed it an hour ago. The background is from our parking garage, genuine footage from 5 weeks ago. The figures have been layered in digitally. The technical team is documenting the manipulation signatures now." How hard will it be to prove? Not hard. For people who understand forensic image analysis, the manipulation is identifiable. The problem is that most people don't understand forensic image analysis, and by the time the proof reaches them, the impression has already been made. He set his phone down on the table. "We have the evidence. The question is whether we can get it in front of the right people before the narrative sets." "The board vote is in 11 days, Emma said. 10, now." He looked at the table. "If Ortega breaks against us, if the persuadables move before we can counter the story, we may not recover enough votes in time." She sat down across from him. He sat across from her. The table between them had documents and printouts and someone's abandoned coffee cup, and it looked like a room where serious work had been happening since before dawn. "Tell me what you know about Reeves," she said. "Not what's in the profile, what you actually know." He looked at her for a moment. "Why?" "Because the photograph is evidence of a plan," she said. "A plan takes resources and time and people. Understanding Reeves means understanding where the edges of this are." He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat back slightly, and she could see him deciding to stop managing the information and simply give it to her. "Dalton Reeves has been on the board for 11 years, he said. "He came in with the Series B funding. He represented the Haverstock Investment Group, which held a significant position in early-stage coal technologies. When the company scaled, his stake scaled with it, and he transitioned from investor representative to full board member." He paused. "For the first 4 years, he was a useful voice, cautious, detailed, the kind of board member you want asking hard questions. Then about 3 years ago, the dynamic shifted." "When did Helena die?" He registered the connection. 5 years ago. The shift came about 2 years after that." "What changed 3 years ago?" "My direction for the company." He put his hands flat on the table. "The healthcare data division was my push. The government cybersecurity contracts were my push." Reeves had been advocating for a different strategic direction. Consumer tech, mass market, the kind of growth model that scales revenue faster, but requires different infrastructure and, in my view, creates different liabilities. We disagreed. I held the position. He had the votes to be loud about it, but not enough to override. He paused. "I think he's been planning this for about 18 months. He's been building toward the Shanghai vote specifically? The Shanghai deal is the proof of concept for everything I've built in the past 3 years. If it goes through, the board direction is set for another 5 years at minimum. If it fails, or if I lose the vote, someone else sets the direction." He said it without drama, just fact. He doesn't want to run the company himself. He wants someone he can direct. Who's his candidate? A man named Gordon Sable. Currently runs a mid-sized tech firm in Austin. Reeves has been cultivating him for 2 years. He looked at the window. Sable's a competent operator. He'd take the company in a completely different direction than I would, but he's not incompetent. He's just... He stopped. Not you, Emma said. Not what I've been building toward. He said it carefully, like the distinction mattered. It's not ego. The direction of this company has real consequences for the people who use our products and the people who work here. The healthcare data work. We're in the middle of deployments that affect patient outcomes in 4 hospital systems. If we abandon that infrastructure halfway through, it's not just a strategic loss. People get hurt in ways that don't show up in quarterly reports. She looked at him. This was the thing she'd been finding harder and harder to bracket. The way he talked about the work. Not like an asset. Like a responsibility. Okay, she said. So Reeves has a plan and he's been executing it. The photograph is the final move before the vote. What do we have to counter it? The forensic analysis, he said. Financial records. There are payment trails in Reeves's board expense accounts that our legal team has been quietly documenting for 6 weeks. Nothing conclusive on its own, but in context, he paused. And the security footage from the garage. The actual footage, not the composite. We can demonstrate that the people in the image were never in that location together. How? Because I know where I was that evening, and there are records. Building access logs, the building's own security system, my assistant's calendar. That placed me elsewhere. The image was constructed using footage of me entering the garage at a different time on a different day. Our security team can document the frame splice. Do it, Emma said. Document everything, every piece of it. She paused. And I want to see the payment trail. He looked at her. Why? Because I want to understand what we're presenting, she said. Not so I can explain it. Your legal team does that. But because if I'm in the room when it happens, I need to understand it well enough to watch people's faces while they process it. That's what I'm actually for in this. He studied her for a moment. Reading the room, he said. I've been doing it since the Jang dinner, she said. That's what I actually contribute, Adrian. The appearances are the cover. The reading is the work. He said nothing for several seconds. Then, Marcus will get you access to everything the legal team has compiled. Good. Emma, he said it carefully. I need you to understand what this means for the arrangement. The photographs the fact that they may name you publicly as the figure in it. They probably will, she said, or someone will. And then it becomes a story about whether I'm real or a prop, and that story tries to discredit both of us at once. She looked at him steadily. I knew something like this was possible when I signed the contract. Knowing it's possible and having your name in a financial misconduct story are 2 different things, he said. Yes, she said. They are. She didn't flinch from it. He watched her not flinch from it and seemed to need a moment to process that. If you want to step back, he started. I don't, she said. The contract has a clause. Adrian. She said his name the way he sometimes said hers, with a weight that meant stop revising what I just told you. I don't want to step back. I want to finish this. The room was quiet. Okay, he said. The next 4 days were the most sustained pressure Emma had experienced in a sequence she had not previously imagined being part of. The story metastasized the way these things do, slowly at first, then suddenly everywhere. By Thursday, 3 more outlets had picked it up, each adding a slightly different layer of interpretation. By Friday, Carla Voss had published a piece that stopped just short of naming Emma directly, but described sources close to the situation indicating that the woman in the photograph was someone with a recent and sudden proximity to Adrian Cole, someone whose background was, in Voss's careful phrasing, unverified in professional contexts. Emma read it at the diner, on her phone, between the morning rush and the lunch setup. Josie found her sitting on a stool in the back, and her expression must have said something because Josie, who was 22 and genuinely warm and usually filled silences with whatever was on her mind, just sat down beside her and didn't say anything at all. I'm fine, Emma said. Okay, Josie said. I'm involved in something complicated. You don't have to tell me. I know, I just... She stopped, put her phone down, looked at the wall where Greta had tacked up the health inspection certificate and a photo of the diner from 20 years ago. I'm doing the right thing, I think. I'm just not sure how it lands. Josie was quiet for a moment. Then, the right thing usually doesn't feel clean. It just feels necessary. Emma looked at her. My mom says that, Josie added. She's annoyingly right about most things. Emma almost smiled. Yeah, okay. She picked up her phone. She had a text from Adrian. Legal team completes documentation tonight. Board presentation being scheduled for Monday. Can we talk this evening? She wrote back, yes. Call me after 7. He called at 7:12, which was essentially on time by his standards. His voice had the particular flatness of someone who had been talking for 12 hours straight and was running low on the energy that made tone possible. Ortega agreed to a private meeting, he said, tomorrow afternoon. That's good? Maybe. He paused. He said he needed to hear it directly from me, which means he's still persuadable. But he also said he'd been getting significant pressure from other board members to wait for the investigation. What investigation? There's no investigation. Reeves is pushing for an internal board review of the photograph before the vote. He's framing it as due diligence. His voice was careful. If he gets enough board members to agree to delay the vote pending a review, he buys himself more time to damage the narrative and we lose the window. Emma sat on her bed with her feet on the floor and her free hand flat on the mattress, grounding herself in the physical reality of the room. What does Ortega need to hear? The evidence, the forensic analysis, the payment trails, the access logs, all of it. He needs to see it before the board meeting. Yes. Then show him everything, she said. Don't manage what he sees, give him all of it and let him reach his own conclusions. He won't trust a presentation that feels curated. A silence. That's a risk. If there are elements that read ambiguously. Adrian. She said it quietly, firmly. Ortega sat through the Zhang dinner watching you for 3 hours. He's been in rooms with you for years. He's not convinced by the photograph. He's confused by it, which is different. Give him the truth unfiltered and trust that he can tell the difference. The moment you filter it for him, he'll feel it. Another silence. Longer this time. You're right, he said, and then quietly, I keep wanting to control the narrative even with the people who might be on our side. I know, she said. It's a hard habit to break when you've been managing things alone for a long time. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed very slightly. How do you do that? He said. Do what? Say the real thing, without making it feel like an accusation. She thought about it. I've had a lot of practice saying hard things without enough time to soften them first, she said. 3 jobs, limited margin for error. You learn to be direct, or you waste time you don't have. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the neighborhood of one. I've been thinking about that, about how different your relationship to time is from mine. I have too much of it, in some ways. Too many resources, too much staff insulation. It makes me slower than I should be at certain things. And faster than you need to be at others, she said. Yes, he said. Exactly that. They were quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the street made its nighttime noise. A car with a specific rattle in its exhaust. Someone's music leaking from an apartment across the alley. How's Lily? She asked. He made a different sound than the almost laugh. Something softer. She wants to know when she's going to meet you. Emma stilled. She knows something's going on, he said. Not the business part. She doesn't know any of that. But Mrs. Patterson told her that I've been very busy with something important, and Lily has apparently decided that anyone important enough to keep her father this busy is someone she needs to evaluate in person. Emma didn't know what to do with that information, so she held it carefully and said, What did you tell her? I said soon, he said. If that's all right. It's all right, she said. She fell asleep at 10:30 that night, which was early for her, and she didn't dream, which was unusual, and she woke up at 5 feeling something she couldn't immediately name. A particular quality of alertness, like something in her had decided to be ready before her brain had finished briefing her on why. The meeting with Ortega was set for 2 o'clock Saturday at a private club uptown that Emma had read about exactly once, in a piece about the kind of spaces that exist specifically to allow powerful people to speak without being watched. She wore the dark navy blazer Marcus had cleared for the occasion and flat shoes because she was already pushing her height comfort limit in the building's general energy. Ortega was already there when they arrived. He was seated at a corner table, and he looked like a man who'd had a difficult week. Not shaken, but carrying more visible weight than he'd had at the Jang dinner. He shook Adrian's hand, and then Emma's, and looked at both of them with the expression of someone trying to triangulate truth from two sources simultaneously. "Thank you for meeting," Adrian said. "You didn't give me much choice," Ortega said, not unkindly. "When you said unfiltered, I assumed you meant something specific." "I did." Adrian opened the portfolio on the table and turned it toward Ortega. "Everything we have, in the order we found it." Ortega looked at the portfolio, then at Adrian. "You're not going to walk me through it? Emma will be here if you have questions. Otherwise," he gestured at the documents, "take the time you need." Ortega looked at Emma. There was a question in his eyes. "The forensic analysis is tabbed first," she said. "The payment trails are behind the blue tab. The access logs are last because they're the most straightforward. They don't require interpretation." She paused. "Read in order. It builds." He looked at her for one more second. Then he opened the portfolio and started reading. Adrian ordered coffee. Emma ordered water. They did not speak to each other, and they did not look over Ortega's shoulder, and they waited. It took 41 minutes. Ortega read without visible reaction, that careful, information-processing stillness that Emma had noticed in him at the Jong dinner. He turned pages methodically. He went back twice to the forensic analysis section. He spent more time than she expected on the payment trail section, and she watched his eyes track across the numbers, and she watched the moment, 12 minutes into that section, when something clicked into place for him. It was subtle. A very slight pause in the eye movement, a breath that was fractionally longer than the ones before it. He'd found something. She didn't know what. She filed the observation and waited. When he finally closed the portfolio, he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then at Adrian. "The Haverstock account," he said. Adrian said, "Yes." "The payment routed through the consulting subsidiary." Ortega's voice was flat and precise and extremely careful. "That's not ambiguous?" "No." "Why didn't you bring this to the full board when you found it?" "Because I found it 6 weeks ago, and I didn't have the forensic confirmation on the photograph yet." Presenting the payment trail without the photograph evidence would have looked like I was constructing an attack on a board member with circumstantial financial data. Ortega looked at him steadily. "But now you have both." "Now we have both." A silence. The room was quiet in the way that expensive private rooms are designed to be quiet. Absorbing, purposeful, the kind of silence that lets people think. "Who constructed the photograph?" Ortega asked. "We believe Reeves commissioned it. We can't yet prove the direct line. The payment moved through 2 intermediary accounts. Our legal team is working on documenting the full chain, but it's deliberate obfuscation, and it takes time. The board meeting is Monday." "Yes." Ortega looked at Emma. She had been watching him for 41 minutes, and he'd been aware of it, the way perceptive people are always aware of being observed, and now he was turning it back on her directly. "What do you think?" he said. It surprised her. Not the question itself, she'd expected to be in this room, but being addressed directly, consulted, treated as a voice that mattered to his conclusion. "I think you already know," she said. "You found what you were looking for in the payment trail. The rest is process." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You've been in every room where this has moved." It wasn't a question. "Not all of them." "The Zhang dinner, Harbison. You talked to Reeves at the conference lunch." "He introduced himself," she said. "I didn't seek him out." "What did you make of him?" She considered. "He's very controlled, the kind of controlled that works because it rarely gets tested. When I didn't react the way he expected," she paused. "He recalibrated. But for a moment, before he did, he was visible. Visible how? Like someone who's been winning for long enough that being met evenly reads as a setback. Or take a look at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Adrian. "I'm not making any commitments today," he said. "I want to speak to 2 other board members before Monday. People I trust who aren't already in a fixed position." "Reasonable," Adrian said. "And I want the legal team's chain of payment documentation the moment it's complete, not summarized, the full document. You'll have it." Ortega stood. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair with the deliberate movements of a man who had made a decision but was choosing not to announce it yet, because announcing it was its own kind of power, and he wasn't ready to spend it. He shook Adrian's hand. He looked at Emma. "For what it's worth," he said, "the photograph never quite looked right to me. The composition." He paused. "I grew up in my uncle's photography studio. Something in the frame-to-subject ratio looked constructed." He left. Emma and Adrian sat across from each other in the empty corner table. "He's with us," she said. "You sound certain." "He said, 'for what it's worth,'" she said. That's a phrase people use when they're offering a personal opinion they're not ready to commit to officially. The fact that he offered it means he's already on the side he's not officially on yet. Adrian looked at the closed portfolio, then at her. "The composition," he said. "He wanted us to know he'd been skeptical from the beginning," she said. "He was giving us something." Adrian was quiet. She could see him processing the last hour, filing it, measuring it against the remaining distance to Monday. "The documentation will be ready by Sunday evening," he said. "Legal confirmed this morning." "Then we go in Monday with everything." "Yes." He looked at the table. Then, "Emma, there's something I need to tell you." The shift in his voice. She'd learned to notice it. The particular quality when he was moving from operational to something more personal. "Reeves people have a name," he said. "They haven't published it yet, but the thread on the financial forums, Marcus monitored it overnight. Someone posted what they claimed was background on the woman in the photograph. The name they used was yours." She absorbed this. "When?" she said. "Last night. It's been picked up in 3 places. Voss is aware. Marcus confirmed she's preparing a follow-up piece. So by Monday it will be public. Possibly before." She sat with that for a long moment. The room was very quiet. She thought about Greta and the diner, and Josie sitting beside her without asking questions, and her mother in Dayton who never pushed anymore. She thought about the 1420 rent and the radiator in the wall. She thought about the legal pad and Ortega, watching, "Don't push." "Let them publish it," she said. Adrian looked at her sharply. "If they put my name on it, and then we walk into that board meeting Monday with everything we have, and the board sees that the woman they've been trying to weaponize is sitting right there, in the room, not hiding, that's not a liability." She met his eyes. "That's the counter-narrative." He was very still. "You're talking about showing up," he said slowly. "I was always showing up," she said. "I'm just talking about showing up visibly." He looked at her with the expression she'd seen only a handful of times, the open one, the one that wasn't managing anything. It was the look she'd seen at the coffee shop when he talked about Helena, and in the car when he'd talked about Lily's question about trains, and once on the sidewalk outside the museum when she'd laughed at the painting. "They'll ask questions," he said, "about the arrangement, about who you are and why you're there. Then we answer them," she said. "Truthfully, I was asked to help. I helped. The rest of it," she paused, "the rest of it is ours. It's not theirs." He said nothing for a moment. The room held the silence carefully. "You know," he said finally, "when Marcus told me about you, about the 3 jobs, the degree, the way you'd been holding things together, I thought I understood what kind of person you were." He paused. "I didn't. What did you think I was?" "Resilient," he said. "Capable. Trustworthy, in the way that people are trustworthy when they have good reasons to be." He looked at her directly. "I didn't think you'd become—" He stopped. "What?" she said quietly. He looked at the table, looked back up. "The person I call," he said, "when I need to think out loud." It sat between them, plain and undefended. Emma didn't know what to do with it immediately. She thought about the word transaction. She thought about it the way you think about a word you used to use until you realized it no longer described the thing it was supposed to describe. "I should get back," she said finally. "I have a shift at 3. "Right." He stood. "I'll have the car." "Bus is fine," she said. "Emma?" "Adrian." She picked up her bag. "I'll see you Monday." She walked out of the private club onto the street, and the city was bright and cold and entirely indifferent, and she walked 2 blocks to the bus stop and stood there while the wind moved through her blazer like it wasn't there. And she thought about Monday and Ortega and the legal documentation and Dalton Reeves and the photograph and everything that was about to arrive all at once. And underneath all of that, like a current running at a different frequency from everything else, the thing Adrian had said in the quiet of the room. "The person I call. When I need to think out loud." The bus came. She got on. She found a seat by the window and watched the city move past. And for the first time in weeks, she stopped making lists and doing math and measuring what she had against what she needed. She just sat there and let herself feel the full weight of where she was, which was somewhere she had not planned to be and could not now imagine leaving. Sunday passed in a controlled tension that Emma spent at her kitchen table, reading every document the legal team sent through the secure portal Marcus had set up for her access, until she understood the payment trail the way she understood the bus schedule or the diner layout. Not as abstraction, but as geography she could navigate in the dark. Adrian texted once at 9 in the evening. "Documentation complete. Full chain confirmed. Legal filing ready." She wrote back, "Good. Get some sleep." A pause. Then, "Lily wanted me to tell you that Senator delivered a very important speech about water conservation today. She says you'd have found it compelling." Emma looked at that message for longer than was probably warranted. "Tell her I'm sorry I missed it," she wrote back, "and that Senator sounds like a significant figure in the amphibian policy space." Adrian's reply came quickly. She says, "Obviously." Emma put her phone face down on the table. She looked at the legal pad. She looked at the wall. She thought, Monday. And then she thought, underneath that, the thing she'd been circling for weeks without quite landing on. Whatever this is, whatever it has become, it's real. And real things, unlike transactions, don't end cleanly. She wasn't sure yet if that was a problem. She thought, sitting in her studio apartment with the radiator clanking and the legal pad full of her own handwriting and the phone face down on the table with a message about a stuffed frog's policy speech, she thought maybe it wasn't. Monday arrived the way she'd known it would. Not with drama, but with the flat, gray light of early morning and the sound of the city starting up again outside her window, indifferent to the fact that this particular day had been circled in her mind for a week. Emma was dressed by 7:15. Dark blazer, the one from the Ortega meeting. She'd had it dry cleaned Sunday afternoon. Flat shoes. Her own bag. Not the borrowed one from the stylist, because she'd decided somewhere between Saturday and Sunday that she was going into that room as herself, not a curated version, and that meant her own things. The legal pad was in her bag. She didn't need it anymore. She'd moved past needing notes. But it was there the way a familiar weight is there, grounding. She made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window and drank it and watched the street below, where a man was arguing mildly with a delivery truck that had blocked his car. And a woman in a red coat was walking fast with her head down. And a kid on a bike was threading between them both, with the particular confidence of someone who'd been doing this route long enough to know where the gaps were. She thought, today is the day it either holds or it doesn't. Then she finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, picked up her bag, and went. The car Marcus had sent was already at the curb. She got in, and for 3 blocks she was alone, and then it stopped, and Adrian got in. And the shape of him in the seat beside her was familiar now in a way that still surprised her when she let herself notice it. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had slept, which was visible. He'd slept better than she'd expected, which probably meant he'd made his peace with the day and its possible outcomes sometime in the night. The way people do when they've done everything they can do and the rest is no longer theirs to control. The legal team is already set up, he said. Documentation ready for presentation. Priya will manage the technical sequence. Who's in the room? 12 board members. Reeves will be there. I couldn't exclude him without tipping the sequence, and I don't want him getting word before he's in the room." He paused. "Ortega spoke to 2 board members yesterday. He called me last night." "And?" "He didn't tell me what he said to them. He just said he'd made some calls." Adrian looked forward. "That's either very good or it's enough to hold the line." "It's good," Emma said. "You can't know that." "No," she said, "but Ortega's not a man who makes calls and then shows up to watch things fall apart. That's not why he'd make calls." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, "You read people the way some people read financial models." "Financial models are easier," she said. "People leave more visible traces." The car moved through morning traffic, and they didn't talk much after that, which was fine. They'd gotten comfortable in silence over the past weeks in the way that you only do with people you're not performing for anymore. She looked at the city going past. He looked at his phone, then set it down, then picked it up again, then put it in his jacket pocket like he was removing a temptation. "Stop checking it," she said. "Whatever's there can wait an hour." He looked at her. "The story about my name broke," he said. "Last night. Voss published the follow-up." Emma went still. "What time?" 11:40. "After I texted you." He paused. She was careful. She didn't make direct allegations. She said that sources indicate the woman in the photograph has been identified as Emma Hart, 30, a service industry worker who has appeared alongside Adrian Cole at several recent public events, and that questions remain about the nature of her connection to Cole Technologies. Service industry worker. The phrasing was precise. It was meant to land a specific way. "How bad is the spread?" she asked. "As of 6 this morning, significant. 3 more outlets picked it up overnight." He watched her face. "I need you to know that our legal team is prepared to push back and that anything said about you is—" "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't manage me right now," she said. Not harshly, just clearly. "I know what they wrote. I know how it was meant to read. I'm fine." She looked at him. "I'm fine. Let's do what we came to do." He held her eyes for a moment, then he nodded once and turned back to the window, and she turned back to hers, and they rode the last 8 minutes in silence that was steady rather than tense. The silence of 2 people who have agreed on the shape of the next hour and are just waiting for it to begin. The boardroom was on the 41st floor. Emma had never been in it before. Her visits had always been the conference rooms, the green room, the lobby. The boardroom was different. It was designed to communicate permanence. Long table in pale wood, chairs upholstered in a gray that cost more than it looked like it did. Windows on 2 sides with a view that on a clear morning like this one went all the way to the water. 12 people were already seated or standing when they walked in. Emma recognized most of them from the briefing documents. Faces she'd studied in profile photographs, names she'd attached to specific positions, specific histories, specific motivations. Ortega was near the far end of the table. He met her eyes briefly and looked away, which told her he was managing his own position and she should do the same. Reeves was at the side of the room, speaking quietly to another board member, a woman named Hartwell, who had been in the fixed negative column of the original briefing. He looked up when Adrian came in. His expression did the thing Emma had observed at the conference lunch, a flicker of recalculation at a speed most people would miss. He looked at Emma. His expression this time didn't flicker. It went carefully, deliberately neutral. She met his eyes and smiled, just enough to be polite, and moved to the seat that Marcus, who was against the wall with a laptop, had indicated with a slight gesture. Adrian took his place at the head of the table. "Thank you all for being here," he said, and the room settled, because the room was designed to settle when a specific voice occupied a specific position at a specific table. "I'll keep this brief. We have material to present, and I'd rather the material speak than my framing of it." He nodded at Priya, who was at the presentation console. The screen at the end of the room lit up. It took 22 minutes to lay out the full case. Priya managed the sequencing efficiently, moving from the forensic image analysis, which was the most technical section and required the most patience from the room, to the payment trail, which was the most damning, to the building access logs and security footage, which were the most straightforward. The documentation was dense and precise, and the room absorbed it in the particular way that rooms absorb information they recognize as significant, with a very specific quality of stillness. Emma watched the room. She watched Ortega, who listened without expression and whose hands were flat on the table in front of him, which she'd come to read as his version of settled. He already knew the direction he was moving and was waiting for the moment to move it. She watched Hartwell, whose expression had gone from the careful neutral of someone managing an alliance to something more complicated. A slight furrow between the brows that appeared during the payment trail section and didn't fully resolve. Hartwell was in Reeves's column, but she'd gotten there through shared strategic positions, not through personal loyalty. Those were different things. Strategic position shifted when the evidence shifted. Personal loyalty was stickier. She watched Reeves. This was the watching she'd been preparing for. He was good. He had the composed, attentive expression of someone engaged in a professional presentation, and if you didn't know what you were looking for, you would read it as exactly that: professional engagement. But Emma had been watching people manage their expressions in high-pressure situations for most of her working life, and Reeves was doing something specific that she recognized. He was performing the reaction he'd prepared for, rather than having the reaction he was actually having. The prepared reaction was composed interest. The actual reaction was happening around the edges, a very slight tension at the jaw, a quality in the way he held himself that had shifted about 4 minutes into the forensic presentation, when the splice evidence appeared on screen and hadn't quite returned to its original position since. He hadn't expected them to have the forensic documentation this complete. He'd expected them to have suspicions, maybe an argument. Not 93 pages of technical and financial evidence organized by a legal team that had clearly been working on this for weeks. When the payment trail section appeared, the Haverstock subsidiary account, the sequential payments mapped to the dates of the photograph's construction and distribution, Emma watched a very small thing happen in Reeves's face. The composed interest thinned. Not much, just enough. He thought they might have the payment trail, but not the full chain. They had the full chain. Priya finished the presentation. The screen held the final summary page, a clean timeline connecting every piece of evidence in sequence. Adrian said, "I'll take questions." For a moment, nobody spoke. Not out of shock. This wasn't a room full of people who performed shock, but out of the particular pause that happens when information has been received and everyone is privately recalibrating simultaneously, and nobody wants to be the first to show the direction of their recalibration. A board member named Castillo, mid-50s, corporate law background, rarely spoke in meetings, according to the briefing, said, "The forensic analysis, the firm that conducted it, is this the same firm that did the Mercer authentication case last year?" "Yes," Priya said. "Their lead analyst is Dr. Rena Choi. She's testified in 3 federal cases. The methodology used here is consistent with her published work." Castillo nodded slowly, filed it. Hartwell spoke next. "The Haverstock subsidiary. This account, it appears in Cole Technologies' records because Haverstock held an early position in the company." "Correct," Adrian said. "The account was legitimate through the early-stage investment period. Activity dropped to near zero after the board transition. The payments documented in the evidence package began approximately 14 months ago." "What were they for?" Hartwell asked. Her voice was careful and even, but there was something in it, a pulling away from a position she'd been occupying. "The payments are coded as consulting services," Priya said. "The entities receiving them have been investigated by our legal team. 2 of them are shell companies with no documented business activity. The third is a media services firm that was incorporated 8 months ago." The room was quiet. A board member Emma didn't recognize. Older, heavy-set, wearing the expression of someone who'd been in enough rooms to recognize this particular shape of situation, looked down the table toward Reeves and said simply, "Dalton." Not a question, not an accusation, just a name, set down on the table like an object that everyone was now going to have to deal with. Reeves unclasped his hands. He recrossed them. He looked at the screen, then at Adrian. "I'd like to review the documentation before responding to any of this," he said. His voice was composed, extremely composed. The composure of someone keeping a structure standing through sheer force of maintenance. "Of course," Adrian said. "I think we should table any further discussion until—" "I don't think we're going to do that, Dalton," Ortega said. The room turned toward him. He was still flat-handed on the table, still composed, but his voice had shifted into something direct and unambiguous and final-sounding. "We have an evidentiary package prepared by a credible legal team, forensic analysis by a nationally recognized firm, and a timeline that is, whatever we want to call it, not ambiguous." Ortega looked at Reeves. "You can request review time, and the board can grant that, and we can spend the next 3 weeks letting our legal teams argue about it while the company hangs in the window, or we can address it today." Reeves said, "Michael, I've been on this board for 9 years," Ortega said, without heat, without drama, with the steady weight of someone who'd made his decision long enough ago that saying it out loud was just procedure. "I've watched this company grow from a mid-sized consultancy into something that genuinely matters in its sector. I've watched Adrian make decisions I didn't always agree with and be right more often than I expected. And I've watched you, Dalton, for the past 3 years, and I've been willing to attribute what I was seeing to professional disagreement." He paused. "I'm not willing to do that anymore." The room breathed. Hartwell spoke. Her voice had made its decision. Emma could hear it in the first word. "I'd like to move to a board vote on the question of an independent external review of the evidence as presented, with findings to be delivered prior to the Shanghai business vote." She paused. "That's not tabling. That's due process on a compressed timeline." "Seconded," said Castillo. The vote was called. It went 9-2 with Reeves abstaining and one board member, a man named Pratt, who'd been in Reeves' column from the beginning, voting against. The independent external review was approved. 36 hours to deliver findings. The Shanghai vote would proceed on schedule. Reeves said nothing during the vote. He sat with his hands recrossed and his expression managing itself, and Emma watched him absorb the arithmetic of the room and understand what it meant. After the vote, the board member who'd said his name, just his name, set down like an object, looked at Reeves and said, "You might want to call your lawyers, Dalton, before this afternoon." The meeting broke at 11:43. People moved toward the door in the careful way of people who have witnessed something significant and are processing it privately while maintaining professional composure in public. Several stopped to speak to Adrian briefly. Not lengthy conversations, just contact, the kind that means "I'm here" and the vote stands. Hartwell passed Emma near the door. She didn't stop, didn't speak, but she looked at Emma for a moment with an expression that was several things at once: recognition, maybe something like respect, and underneath both of those, the particular look of someone who has recalculated and arrived somewhere different from where they started and isn't entirely sure how they feel about the distance. She moved on without a word. Emma didn't need a word. Reeves left without speaking to anyone. She watched him go. The controlled walk, the set of the shoulders, the composure maintaining itself all the way to the door, and then he was gone and the room exhaled very slightly, the way rooms do when a specific pressure exits them. Marcus appeared at Emma's elbow. "External review firm is already on the line," he said quietly. "Legal team is managing the handoff. 36 hours. The Shanghai counterparties, have they been notified about the board situation? Adrian's calling Richard Zhang personally this afternoon." He paused. "That conversation will go better than the week suggested." She nodded. She looked across the room, where Adrian was speaking with Castillo and another board member whose name she'd need to look up later, and his posture was different from what it had been coming in. Not relieved, not triumphant, but something had unlocked in the way he was standing that hadn't been there for weeks. He looked up across the room and found her eyes. Just for a moment. She gave him the same small nod she'd given him at the Harbison keynote, and he turned back to the conversation he was in. Awesome. The building lobby was cold after the regulated air of the 41st floor. Emma pushed through the glass doors into the morning, which had gotten brighter while they were upstairs, the gray turning to something closer to actual sun. She stood on the sidewalk and let herself just stand there for a minute. No list, no math, just the cold air and the light and the fact that it had held. Emma. She turned. Adrian was coming through the doors behind her, jacket on but tie loosened, the first time she'd seen that, with his phone in his hand and the particular look of someone who has just finished managing something enormous and is now in the very first moment after. I thought you had calls, she said. I do. He came to stand beside her on the sidewalk. In 20 minutes. They stood there. The city moved around them at its specific, uninterested pace, and for a moment they were just two people on a sidewalk in the middle of a weekday morning. The external review will confirm everything, he said. I know. Reeves is done. Not today. There'll be process, but done. He looked at the street. The Shanghai vote is intact. Yes. Which means... He stopped. She knew what it meant. The arrangement had a defined end date, tied to the board vote. The vote was proceeding. The crisis had resolved, or would within 36 hours when the external review confirmed what the room had already decided, which meant the thing they'd built in the margins of the arrangement, the coffee, the texts, the museum afternoon, the 42 pages of briefing, and the legal pads full of notes, and the conversation about trains dreaming, that all existed in the space that was now closing. She knew that. She'd known it was coming. She'd been aware of it for 2 weeks, the way you're aware of a weather system on the horizon. You can see it, you can prepare for it, and when it arrives, it still changes the temperature. I know what it means, she said. He looked at her. The vote goes through, Reeves is out, the deal closes, she said. The arrangement was always going to end here. Yes, he said slowly. So, she put her bag on her shoulder. I should get back. I have a shift at 2. He said nothing for a moment. Emma, he said. The car can take me, she said. Tell Marcus, I'm not talking about the car. His voice was quieter than his normal register, stripped of the management layer. I need you to know that what you did in that room today, what you've done for the past month, it wasn't... He stopped. I can't categorize it the way the contract categorized it. It was different from that. She looked at him. The contract was about appearances, he said. You went about 6 layers deeper than appearances, and I don't know how to... He stopped again. He was not good at this. She'd noticed that from the beginning. He was exceptional at being direct about facts and genuinely uncomfortable at being direct about things that didn't have a clean factual shape. I don't want to presume about what any of this was for you. She was quiet for a moment. Ask me, she said. He looked at her. What? You're standing there not saying the thing because you don't want to presume, she said. So just ask me what you actually want to know. Something moved across his face. The almost smile, the open expression, and then something beneath that, something more exposed than she'd seen before. Was any of it real? He said. For you. Any part of it. It was the most unguarded thing he'd ever said to her. She could hear what it cost him to say it, the way it stripped away everything he was usually careful to keep in place. She looked at him on the sidewalk in the cold morning with his tie loosened and his phone in his hand and the honest, undefended question on his face. Yes, she said. Most of it. He absorbed that. Most. The parts I'm still sorting out. She paused. Give me some time to sort them out. How much time? I don't know yet. She was being honest. She was always being honest with him now. It had become a habit she couldn't break. I've been managing a crisis for a month alongside a person I didn't know, and somewhere in that I stopped being able to tell where the management ended and the actual thing began. That takes time to read. He nodded slowly. Not agreement exactly, more like understanding. Okay, he said. But yes, she said. The answer to your question is yes. He was quiet for a moment, then, okay, he said again, differently. She almost laughed. That's twice. I'm processing. I know. She shifted her bag. Go make your calls. Emma. He said her name one more time, the way he said it when he had something he needed to land. Will you have dinner with me this week? Not for... He gestured vaguely at the building behind them. Not for this. She looked at him. Lily wants to meet you, he said. She's been asking for 2 weeks, and I've been telling her soon, and she has opinions about my definition of soon. He paused. It would be a dinner at the house. Her, Mrs. Patterson, you, me, nothing arranged, nothing strategic, just Dinner, Emma said. Dinner. She thought about the briefing documents and the emerald dress and the 42 pages and the word transaction and how far it was from where she was standing right now on a sidewalk outside a glass building in a financial district, having just helped dismantle a conspiracy and being asked to dinner by a man who'd spent most of the past month gradually becoming something she didn't have a clean word for. Thursday, she said. Something in his expression settled. Not relief exactly, but the particular quality of someone who'd been holding a thing carefully and has now found a safe place to set it down. Thursday, he said. She turned and walked to the car. She did not look back, which required the same amount of discipline it always did. And this time she was not entirely successful. At the last second, at the door of the car, she glanced back. He was still standing on the sidewalk watching her go. He didn't pretend he wasn't. She got in the car. The 36 hours passed with the specific quality of aftermath. Not quiet, but a different kind of noise than what had come before. The external review firm delivered its findings in 31 hours, which was 5 hours ahead of deadline, which either meant the evidence was that clear or that they'd assembled a team that worked through the night, or both. The findings confirmed everything. The photograph was a digital composite, the manipulation signatures consistent with professional-grade fabrication software, the payment trails connecting to Reeves' associated accounts through 3 layers of intermediary companies, the final payments dated to 8 days before the image was distributed. The legal filing went to the relevant regulatory bodies Tuesday afternoon. Reeves resigned from the board Tuesday evening, effective immediately, in a statement prepared by his lawyers that was 2 sentences long and said nothing of substance. Emma read it on her phone during the data entry shift. She set the phone down and finished the hour she had left and thought about what 2 sentences worth of consequence looked like for a man who'd spent 14 months building toward a specific outcome. The Shanghai vote was rescheduled for Wednesday. It went through 11-0. The board member named Pratt, who'd been in Reeves's column, voted in favor. Emma learned this from a text Marcus sent her at 4:17 Wednesday afternoon. 11-0. Deal proceeds. Thank you, Emma. She was at the dry cleaners. She read the text in the back room where they sorted the garments, standing between a rack of other people's winter coats and a shelf of pressing forms, and she felt something move through her that wasn't exactly relief and wasn't exactly joy, but was somewhere between both of those and steadier than either. She wrote back, "That's good. Tell Adrian." Marcus replied, "He already knows. He's been waiting to hear from you first." She stood there for a moment. Then she went back to work. That evening, Carla Voss published a retraction and a follow-up piece. The retraction was brief and precise. The allegation that Emma Hart was connected to any financial misconduct at Cole Technologies was incorrect, and MarketWire's sourcing had been manipulated by a third party now under regulatory investigation. The follow-up piece was more substantial. It outlined the conspiracy, the forensic evidence, Reeves's resignation, and the board vote outcome. It quoted an anonymous source within the board as saying that the attempt to frame Adrian Cole had, in the end, demonstrated the opposite of what it intended. The photograph was designed to show a man who couldn't be trusted, the source said. What it actually showed was a man worth going to these lengths to take down. Those aren't the same thing. Emma read the piece at her kitchen table at 9 in the evening with her coffee and her legal pad, and she sat with that sentence for a while. The phone buzzed. Adrian. "Did you read it?" he said. "The Voss piece, yes." "The anonymous board source is Ortega," he said. "He told me this afternoon he was talking to her." "It's a good quote," Emma said. "It's an accurate one." A pause. "How are you?" She thought about how she'd felt in the back room of the dry cleaners, between the winter coats and the pressing forms. She thought about the word transaction and how thoroughly it had stopped applying. "I'm okay," she said. "Actually okay." Not the diner answer. She almost laughed. He'd remembered she'd told him once, weeks ago, that "I'm okay" was what she said at work, on autopilot, and that the actual version was harder to say. He'd filed it. Of course he'd filed it. "Actually okay," she said again. "For real." "Good." He said it quietly. Thursday is still Thursday? Thursday is still Thursday. A pause. Lily has prepared what she describes as a formal agenda. Emma put her cup down. An agenda. For the dinner, topics she wants to cover. She has it written on a notepad. She showed me this evening. The first item is frogs, general overview, and I was not allowed to read past that. Emma looked at the ceiling. Something in her chest was doing the thing it had been doing more and more often over the past weeks. The thing she didn't have a name for that felt like warmth and also felt like terror and was probably both. Does she know? Emma said. She knows I've been spending time with someone, he said. She knows you helped with something important. She doesn't know the details. She's 7. He paused. She asked me if you were nice. I said yes. She said that wasn't enough information. She said she needed to conduct her own assessment. She sounds rigorous. Terrifyingly so. He paused again, and the pause had a quality she recognized. The edge of something he was about to say that mattered. I told her you were the person who helped us when things were very hard, and that you were someone I trusted. She said, he stopped. What did she say? She said, then she's already family. His voice was careful, level, but she could hear what was underneath it. She's 7. She says things and she means them completely, and she doesn't know what they cost yet. Emma sat very still. What did you say to her? She asked quietly. I said she might be right about that. A pause. I said we'd have to see. The apartment was very quiet. The radiator had been silent for 3 days, which was unusual and slightly unnerving, and without it the room felt different, like something habitual had been subtracted and she hadn't adjusted to its absence yet. Adrian, she said. Yes. I'll be there Thursday. She paused. Tell Lily I'm looking forward to the agenda. Tell her I expect a thorough presentation. She could hear, she was sure she could hear, though she would not be able to prove it, the shape of what crossed his face when she said that. I'll tell her, he said. Good night, she said. Good night, Emma. She set the phone down and looked at the legal pad on the table. The notes from the first briefing were still there, layered under weeks of additions. Ortega, watching, don't push, and Haverstock subsidiary and forensic analysis, Dr. Choi, and in the margin, from the coffee shop Saturday, written while he was telling her about trains dreaming, Lily, Senator, water cycle speech. She looked at that last one for a long time. Then she turned to a new page. She didn't write anything on it. She just turned it and looked at the clean, empty white of it and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not the presence of a plan, but the absence of one. The unfamiliar, slightly frightening, quietly extraordinary sensation of not knowing exactly what came next. She closed the legal pad. She got up and washed her coffee cup and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The radiator stayed quiet. She fell asleep faster than she had in weeks. 2. Wednesday passed in the way that days pass after a crisis breaks. People who'd been tense began to move differently. Conversations that had been careful loosened slightly. The air in the Cole Technologies building on the 43rd floor had a different quality when Marcus called her mid-afternoon to give her the final numbers from the regulatory filing. Thursday came. Emma stood in front of her mirror at 6:15 in clothes that were her own. Not the stylist's choices, not the event wardrobe, just hers. And she looked at herself for a moment. She thought about the first day she'd come to this building in a diner uniform with a ketchup stain on the sleeve and shoes whose left sole was separating at the toe. And she thought about the 43 floors and the number on the page Marcus had slid across the table and the word transaction, which she'd used like a life jacket until the water it was keeping her out of turned out to be somewhere she actually wanted to be. She picked up her bag. Her own bag. She turned off the kitchen light. In the lobby of her building, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number which made her pause before she realized it was a number she'd never added to her contacts. She opened it. Hi. My dad gave me this number. I'm Lily. I want you to know I've reviewed your public profile, Dad helped. And I have some follow-up questions about your communications background because I think media relations might be relevant to amphibian conservation advocacy, and I'd like to discuss this at dinner. Also, Senator has prepared a brief remark. See you soon. Senator Cole, dictated to Lily Cole. Emma stood in her lobby and read the message twice. Then she stood there for one more moment, doing the thing she rarely let herself do, just feeling it. The full, unmanaged, undocumented weight of it, the improbability, the specific shape of how you end up in a life nothing prepared you for and find out it fits. She typed back, "Tell Senator I'll be honored to hear his remarks. And tell him I've been following the amphibian conservation space and I have thoughts. See you soon. Emma." She pushed through the lobby door. The evening was cold and getting dark, the city lighting up in segments, and she walked to the car with her bag on her shoulder and the text on her phone and the clean, empty page of the legal pad waiting at home. She thought, this is what it feels like when something stops being an arrangement. She thought, this is what it feels like when something starts. The house was not what she'd expected. She wasn't sure what she'd expected exactly. Something that announced itself, probably. Something that said Billionaire the way the 43rd floor said it. All glass and controlled light and the deliberate architecture of importance. What she found instead, when the car turned off the main road into a quieter neighborhood where the trees were old enough to have opinions about the buildings around them, was a house that looked like someone actually lived in it. It was large. She wasn't going to pretend it wasn't large, but it was the kind of large that had accumulated rather than been designed to impress. There were lights on in 3 windows, warm yellow against the dark. A bicycle was leaning against the porch railing at a slightly precarious angle. Near the front door, someone had placed a ceramic pot with a plant in it that was clearly struggling but hadn't been removed, as if whoever was responsible for it wasn't ready to give up yet. She stood on the front path for a moment before ringing the bell, looking at the struggling plant. The door opened before she could ring anything. Lily Cole was approximately 4 feet tall, had her father's dark eyes and what appeared to be a purple marker stain on her left wrist, and was looking at Emma with the specific, focused assessment of someone who had been preparing for this evaluation for longer than Emma had been preparing for it. "You're Emma," Lily said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Emma said. "You must be Lily." "I'm also Senator's representative," Lily said. "He couldn't come to the door because he's on the hall table and I was told not to move him. But he wanted me to inform you that he's aware of your arrival." "I appreciate the update," Emma said seriously. Lily studied her for one more moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider, in the precise manner of someone who has decided that an initial assessment has been satisfactory but reserves the right to revise. "Come in," she said. "I have an agenda." "I heard," Emma said. "I've been looking forward to it." Neat. Adrian was in the kitchen. This was, Emma would think later, one of the things she hadn't been briefed on and couldn't have been. The particular quality of a person in their own space, in the room where they lived rather than the rooms where they performed. He was at the stove with his sleeves rolled up, managing something that smelled like garlic and something richer underneath it. And he looked up when she came in, and there was a moment where neither of them said anything, and the moment had a very specific weight. The weight of all the weeks between the first day in the elevator and this kitchen on a Thursday evening. "You made it," he said. "You expected otherwise?" "No." A pause. "Mrs. Patterson had a family commitment, so it's just us tonight. I hope that's—" "It's fine," Emma said. "I'm cooking," he said, which was self-evident, and then he seemed to hear himself saying the self-evident thing and added, "I should warn you that I'm competent, but not, I wouldn't call it extraordinary." That's a very specific self-assessment. "I try to be accurate." Lily appeared at Emma's elbow. She had a notepad. The notepad was spiral-bound and had a frog sticker on the cover. "We should do the agenda before dinner," she said, "so we're not distracted by food." Adrian looked at Emma over Lily's head with an expression that said, "I told you, and I'm sorry, and I'm also not sorry simultaneously." "Lead the way," Emma said to Lily. They sat at the kitchen table, Emma and Lily across from each other, Adrian at the stove maintaining a respectful distance from the agenda, and Lily opened the notepad to the first page with the focused ceremony of someone conducting an important proceeding. "Item 1, Lily said. "Frogs, general overview." "Go ahead," Emma said. "Do you know anything about frogs already, or should I start from the beginning?" "I know a moderate amount," Emma said. but I'd like to hear your overview. You probably know things I don't. Lily considered this. What do you know? Glass frogs have translucent skin. You can see their organs. Their hearts beat visibly. Emma paused. The poison dart frog has a aposematic coloring. The bright colors are a warning to predators. And the wood frog can survive being frozen during winter, which I still think sounds impossible. Lily stared at her. You knew about the wood frog, Lily said. I looked it up, Emma said. Why? Because you were going to ask, Emma said. Lily turned to look at Adrian at the stove. Adrian was looking at the wall above the range with an expression of profound innocence. Dad, Lily said. Hmm? She looked up frogs. Did she? Before coming here, Lily turned back to Emma. The assessment in her eyes had shifted, not completely, but definitively. That's actually very considerate. I thought so, Emma said. Lily made a small note on the notepad. Emma couldn't read it from across the table, but the act of noting felt significant. I'm going to move item 1 to a more advanced overview, Lily said, since you already have foundational knowledge. Is that okay? That's more than okay, Emma said. The advanced overview took 22 minutes and covered the wood frog's cryoprotection mechanisms, the breeding habits of the Suriname toad, which Lily described with the clinical enthusiasm of someone who found the deeply strange simply interesting rather than alarming, and a detailed explanation of why Senator had been named Senator, which expanded considerably from the version Adrian had told her weeks ago and included the information that Lily had watched 3 congressional hearings since then and had opinions about committee procedure. He doesn't filibuster, Lily said. That's his main strength as a senator. He just listens and then says the important thing. That's actually a rare quality, Emma said. I know. Lily looked at the stuffed frog on the hall table, visible through the kitchen doorway. He's very good at his job. Adrian set plates on the counter behind them. The something with garlic had resolved into pasta with what appeared to be a proper sauce, and bread that was from a bakery but had been heated in the oven, and a salad that he'd clearly spent time on. It wasn't extraordinary by the self-assessment, but it was real, and it was made for people who were going to eat it, and that counted for considerably more than extraordinary in Emma's current experience of the world. Item 2, Lily said, turning a page. Is there a break for dinner? Adrian asked. After item 2, Lily said. Item 2 is short. She looked at Emma. Do you make my dad less worried? The kitchen went very quiet. Emma looked at Lily, at the completely earnest, completely direct face of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned that some questions are supposed to be asked sideways. Why do you ask that? Emma said carefully. He worries, Lily said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting an observable fact. He thinks I don't notice, but I notice. He gets a specific face when he's worried, like he's looking at something far away that isn't there. She paused. He had that face a lot, and then he had it less, and then things got bad again, and he had it a lot. And now, she considered, less again. She looked at Emma. I think that's because of you, but I wanted to check. Emma was aware, in her peripheral vision, that Adrian had gone very still at the counter. She looked at Lily. She thought about the right answer and the true answer, and whether those were the same thing, and she decided, because this was Lily, who deserved real things, that they were. I think we made each other less worried, Emma said. Him about his work and me about... She paused. About a lot of things. Lily absorbed this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she made another note on the notepad. Okay, she said. That's good. She closed the notepad. We can eat now. They ate at the kitchen table because Lily had decided the dining room was too echoey for conversation, which Emma privately agreed with. The pasta was good, genuinely good, competent shading towards something better when you weren't paying close attention to it, the way honest cooking sometimes surprised you. Lily talked through most of dinner about a book she was reading about migratory patterns in Central American tree frogs, and then about her class at school where they were studying the water cycle, which she found interesting primarily because Senator had already covered it in his earlier speech, and it was validating to have the curriculum agree. Adrian ate and listened and occasionally said something that made Lily reconsider a point, and once he said something that made her say, That's actually a good argument. I'll think about it," which he received with visible satisfaction. Emma watched them. She ate her pasta and watched a man and his daughter navigate each other with the particular combination of friction and ease that meant they'd been working out how to be in each other's lives for a long time. That there had been hard evenings and silly evenings and boring evenings, and the kind of evenings that cracked you open, and that all of those had accumulated into this: a kitchen table, a pasta dinner, a spiral notepad with a frog sticker. And it was imperfect and slightly chaotic and more real than anything Emma had sat across from in years. After dinner, Lily was given 30 minutes before bed and spent them showing Emma the frog taxonomy poster in her room, pointing out her favorites with the precision of a curator, explaining why the red-eyed tree frog was objectively the most well-designed, and then introducing Senator formally, which involved placing him on the desk and stepping back so Emma could assess him properly. Emma assessed him properly. "He looks like someone who takes his responsibilities seriously," she said. Lily nodded, satisfied. "He does. He's very reliable." "The best senators are." Senator was returned to his position on the hall table on the way back down. Lily informed Emma that she could come back and they would cover the remaining agenda items at a future date, which Emma understood was both practical and a form of invitation, and she said she'd like that, and Lily said good. And then Adrian appeared at the bottom of the stairs and told Lily it was time. Lily looked at Emma for a moment with the full direct gaze that she'd been deploying all evening without self-consciousness. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I'm glad I was invited," Emma said. "You can come back," Lily said. "That's not just politeness. I actually mean it." "I know," Emma said. "Thank you." Lily went upstairs. Adrian followed to do the bedtime routine, and Emma sat in the living room and looked at Senator on the hall table and listened to the sounds of the house. Water running, a door, Lily's voice asking something, Adrian's voice answering, a pause, Lily's voice again with the specific rhythmic quality of a story being negotiated. 23 minutes later, Adrian came back downstairs. He sat on the other end of the sofa and looked at the coffee table and then at Emma, and said nothing for a moment. "She asked whether trains dream," he said. Emma looked at him. "That's her question every few weeks," he said. "She asks it again because she's not satisfied with any answer yet. She says the question is still open." He paused. "Tonight she said that she asked you once. She told me she thought of you when she asked it. And then she corrected herself and said she hadn't asked you yet, but she'd been wondering what you'd say." "What did you tell her?" Emma asked. "I said she should ask you herself." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" she said. "About trains." He looked at the coffee table. "I think—" He stopped. "I think that anything that carries people from one place to another for long enough probably picks up something of the journey, whether that's dreaming or just weight, accumulated weight." He paused. "I think some trains have been carrying more than cargo for a long time, and probably they go somewhere in the night when no one's watching." She looked at him. "That's a better answer than yours was the first time," she said. He looked up. "You remembered what I told her?" "I remember most things you've said," she said, simply, without making it more than it was. "I pay attention." The room was quiet. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its nighttime thing. A dog somewhere, a car passing slowly, the old trees settling into whatever old trees did in the dark. "Emma," he said. "I know," she said. "You don't know what I was going to say." "You were going to say that the arrangement is over," she said. "That the contract period has ended. That the vote went through and Reeves is gone and the crisis is resolved and technically there's no professional reason for us to—" "That's not what I was going to say," he said. She looked at him. "I was going to say that I don't know how to do this," he said. "The next part, whatever this is, I'm not—" He stopped. "I haven't been good at this since Helena. I've been good at the company and at Lily, and I have been genuinely, consistently bad at the parts of life that don't have clear parameters." He looked at her. "I need you to know that going in, that I'll get things wrong, that I'll be too controlled at the wrong moments and not controlled enough at others, and that I will sometimes prioritize the wrong thing and need to be told." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "You're not easy." No, and I'm not uncomplicated, she said. I'm broke in ways that go beyond money. I've spent so long managing survival that I don't always know how to just exist. I work too much and trust too slowly, and I spent the first 3 weeks of knowing you telling myself this was a transaction because that was the only frame I had for something I didn't understand. And now, he said quietly. And now I understand it, she said, which is terrifying in its own way. He looked at her. Terrifying how? Because real things can fail, she said. Transactions have an end date. Real things have just the future, which is harder. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. It is. I'm choosing the harder thing, she said. He looked at her. The open expression, the one she'd seen in pieces throughout the past weeks, and was now seen whole, unguarded, without any of the management layers. So am I, he said. The following weeks were not a montage. That was the thing she would understand later, looking back. There was no smooth transition, no clean before and after. Real things didn't work like that. There was the morning 3 weeks later when she came over for what was supposed to be a Sunday breakfast, and Lily had a project due Monday that she'd entirely forgotten about, and Adrian hadn't known about. And the next 2 hours were controlled panic involving a poster board and colored markers, and Emma looking up facts about the water cycle on her phone while Lily dictated and Adrian cut construction paper with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb. And the project was finished at 11:47 and was genuinely pretty good considering, and Lily declared it excellent and went to watch television and left Adrian and Emma standing in the kitchen surrounded by marker caps and paper scraps looking at each other. Does this happen often? Emma asked. More than I'd like, he said. She has her father's relationship with preparation timelines. He looked at her. That's true, she said. He conceded it with a look. There was the evening Emma's mother called, and Emma, for the first time, actually told her something real. Not all of it, not the arrangement and the conspiracy and the board meeting, but the important part, the part that had lasted past all of that. Her mother went quiet in the way that meant she was feeling something significant and wasn't sure how to hold it. Is he good to you? Her mother asked. Emma thought about the 42 pages, the condensed note at the top, the way he'd asked, "Are you okay in the boardroom?" when he could have gone straight to briefing her. The way he'd said, "The person I call on a sidewalk in the financial district with his tie loosened." Yes, she said. He's good to me. And his little girl? Emma thought about the spiral notepad, the advanced overview. That's actually very considerate. She paused. She's remarkable. Her mother cried a little. Emma let her. There was the day Emma gave notice at the dry cleaners. Not because anyone told her to. Adrian had been careful to the point of studied restraint about anything that touched her financial independence, the way you're careful with something that matters to the person it belongs to. She gave notice because she'd been offered a contract communications role with a nonprofit that worked on environmental policy, a role that used her actual degree and paid better than both service jobs combined, and that she'd gotten through a connection from Diana Fell, the woman from the Harbison conference who'd watched her work the room and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." She told Adrian at dinner, an actual dinner, in a restaurant, the two of them, the kind that was not an arranged appearance but simply two people choosing to be in the same room over food. And he listened and asked 3 specific questions about the role, and then said, "Is this what you wanted when you studied communications?" "Something in this direction," she said. "Not this exactly, but the same compass heading." "Then it's good," he said. "You're not going to say anything more than that?" "What else should I say?" "Most people say congratulations." "I assumed that was implied, but," he said. "Congratulations, Emma." "Thank you, Adrian." He looked at her across the table with the almost smile. "You're going to be exceptional at it." "You don't know that." "Well, I watched you work a room full of some of the most difficult people in the city for a month," he said, "and read 50 research papers on the side. Yes, I do." She looked at him. "Stop." "Stop what?" "Being right about things." "I'll try," he said. "I'm historically bad at it." She laughed, and it was the real kind, the one that came without notice. and the restaurant was indifferent to it the way restaurants are, and it didn't matter. Tang. There was also, because nothing is only the good parts, and any story that tells you otherwise is leaving things out. The night she found him at the kitchen table at midnight when she'd come over to pick up something she'd left, and he had paperwork spread in front of him and the specific quality of face that Lily had described, looking at something far away that wasn't there. "Adrian," she said. He looked up. He hadn't heard her come in. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing happened," he said. You have the face," she said. He looked at her. The face. Lily's description, looking at something far away. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "What is it?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the paperwork, which appeared to be financial projections for the next fiscal year. Then he said, "There are days when I think about what the company was supposed to be, what I was building toward when Helena was alive, and we used to talk about it at this same table, actually, and she'd tell me which parts were realistic and which parts were—" He stopped. Emma said nothing. She waited. "I built most of it," he said, "most of what we talked about. And there are days that feels like the best thing, and there are days it just—" He stopped again. "It just reminds me of what I was building it for and who isn't here to see it." The kitchen was very quiet. "I know that doesn't go away," Emma said. "I'm not under the impression it goes away." "No," he said. "And I'm not trying to— She paused, finding the words. "I'm not trying to be a replacement for something. I know that's not what this is." He looked at her. "I know you know that. I just want you to be able to say it," she said. "The real version, when it's heavy. You don't have to manage it around me." He looked at the table for a long moment. Then, "It's heavy some nights," he said. "Tonight it's heavy." "Okay," she said. She got up and made tea. She'd learned where everything was, and she sat back down and they sat at the midnight table with the paperwork and the tea and didn't fix anything, because some things aren't fixed. They're just carried differently with more hands. That was also the night she understood something she hadn't been able to name before. That choosing someone is not a single moment. It's a sequence of smaller moments, most of them undramatic, some of them difficult. And the choosing is in showing up for those too. Not just the crisis, not just the board meeting and the photograph and the 36-hour countdown, but the midnight table and the forgotten project and the question about trains that doesn't have an answer yet. She drove home that night thinking about that, about how the arrangement had been neat and defined and she'd held it at arm's length precisely because of that, because something with an end date was safer than something without one, and how she'd ended up here anyway, in the after, which had no end date, which was harder and better and considerably more real. She thought about what she'd said to Lily's question. We made each other less worried, and she thought about how that was true and also not the whole truth. The whole truth was that they'd made each other something more than less worried. They'd made each other possible in ways that would have been difficult to anticipate from a 43rd floor conference room with a contract between them and a number on a page. The whole truth was that sometimes the arrangement is the story, and sometimes it's just the door the story walks through. 6 months after the board meeting, Adrian Cole was standing on the waterfront terrace of a restaurant where he'd booked a table for 3. The evening was warm. One of those early summer evenings that arrived as a genuine surprise after a long spring, when the air had a quality of permission to it, like the city had decided to be generous for one night. The water caught the light and held it at angles, and the terrace was full of people doing the particular thing that people do on warm evenings by water, which is exist a little more openly than they usually allow themselves to. Lily had senator in her bag. Emma had told her she didn't need to bring him, and Lily had considered this and decided to bring him anyway, on the grounds that he rarely got to travel, and this seemed like an occasion. Emma was telling Lily something. He couldn't hear exactly what. They were at the railing looking at the water, Emma leaning slightly toward her the way she did when she was taking something seriously, Lily with her hands on the railing and her head tilted at the angle that meant she was listening and also forming a rebuttal. The evening light was on both of them. Adrian stood back and watched his daughter laugh at something Emma said. The real laugh, the unself-conscious one that she'd inherited from Helena and that he was grateful every day she'd kept. And he felt the thing that didn't have a clean name, the same one he'd felt in the kitchen that first morning when she'd explained glass frogs before school. except larger now, and differently shaped, because now the unnamed thing included Emma, had arranged itself to include her gradually through all the weeks and conversations and negotiated silences and the midnight table and the board meeting and the advanced frog overview and the pasta dinner and the text messages about senators' policy speeches. He thought about what Marcus had said to him the morning after the board vote, when Adrian had called to debrief and Marcus had said, "For what it's worth, I didn't just recommend her because she needed the money and she was trustworthy." A pause. "I recommended her because I'd watched her hold things together when everything was trying to fall apart, and I thought that was someone you needed to know, not for the arrangement, just—" Another pause. "Just generally." Adrian had said, "You could have led with that." Marcus had said, "You wouldn't have believed me." He'd been right. Emma turned from the railing and saw him watching them and tilted her head in the way that meant, "What?" And he shook his head slightly. "Nothing. Come here." And she said something to Lily, who nodded, and they both came back toward the table. And Lily immediately wanted to know if the restaurant had a children's menu that was actually interesting or only interesting to adults who thought macaroni and cheese was sufficient. And Emma said she'd seen calamari on the menu, which Lily had recently expressed curiosity about. And Lily said she was willing to try calamari but needed to understand the preparation method first. They sat down. Lily interrogated the server about the calamari with a thoroughness that the server, to their credit, met with complete seriousness. Emma proofread the menu with the focused attention she brought to everything, circling 2 items with her finger on the table without picking up an actual pen, the habit of someone who'd spent years making decisions about where every dollar went. Adrian watched her do it and felt ordinary, in the best sense. Not managed, not alone, not the concept of himself that lived on the 43rd floor. Just here, at a table, with his daughter and a woman who'd come in through a side door and changed the floor plan. "The calamari is fried," Lily said, returning her attention to the table with the verdict delivered. "That's acceptable. I'll try it." She looked at Emma. "What are you getting?" "The fish," Emma said, "and probably your father's bread if he doesn't finish it." "I always finish the bread," Adrian said. "You've never once finished the bread," Emma said. Lily looked between them with the expression of someone confirming a known dynamic. "She's right," Lily said. "You always say you'll finish the bread." "I finish most of the bread." "The half you leave is my favorite half," Emma said. He looked at her. She was looking at the menu with a small private expression that he'd learned to recognize as the one she wore when she was amused and trying not to be obvious about it. "Dad," Lily said. "Yes." "Are you happy?" He looked at his daughter, 7 years old and change, with Helena's laugh and his dark eyes and opinions about everything, and a stuffed frog in her bag named Senator, and a specific diagnostic skill for emotional states that she deployed without warning or mercy. He looked at Emma, who had looked up from the menu at the question, who was watching him with the quiet, steady attention she brought to everything that actually mattered to her. He thought about the morning in the same city when he'd driven to a board meeting with a folder of bad news and a problem he didn't know how to solve. He thought about a conference room on the 43rd floor and a woman in a diner uniform with a ketchup stain on the sleeve who read 42 pages of briefing and then found 50 more on her own. He thought about trains and what they might dream, and a 7-year-old's question that still didn't have an answer. He thought about the midnight table. He thought about the boardroom and Ortega's flat-handed decision and the moment the photograph collapsed under the weight of truth. He thought about a waterfront terrace where a different crisis had started, and this one was ending, or not ending, opening, maybe, becoming something with more room in it. "Yes," he said, "I'm happy." Lily nodded, satisfied. She picked up her water glass. "Good," she said. "That was item 3 on my agenda. I forgot to ask at dinner." She looked at Emma. "Are you happy?" Emma looked at Lily. She looked at Adrian. The warm evening moved around them, and the water held the light, and the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous and not responsible for any of the small human things that mattered inside it. "Yes," Emma said, "I really am." Lily set down her glass. "Okay, good." She picked up the menu. "Now, someone explain to me what risotto is and whether it's worth my time." Adrian reached across the table and took Emma's hand, which he hadn't done in public, genuinely, without the apparatus of arrangement around it. Until this moment. It was brief. Just a moment of contact, unphotographed, unstrategic, belonging entirely to the two of them and the warm evening and the restaurant and the water-catching light. She turned her hand over and held his back for that moment. And then they both picked up their menus, because Lily was asking about risotto with gathering urgency. And the evening was moving, and there were good things to eat and a child to feed and a water view going golden in the last of the sunlight. Later, Emma would try to explain to herself what had changed, not what had happened. The events were clear enough, documented in her own handwriting across a legal pad she still had, worn now at the edges. But what had changed inside of her? What the past months had done to the person who'd sat on the floor of her kitchen and done math that never came out right, and told herself she was fine in the automatic way of someone who'd stopped believing it. The simple answer was, she'd been seen. Not by the photographers at the venue entrances, not by the financial news outlets who'd named her without asking, not by Carla Voss or Dalton Reeves or the board members who'd watched her work the room. By a man who read 42 pages to prepare for her and then wrote a condensed version in case she needed it. By a child who put her on an agenda and made notes in a spiral pad. By a Tuesday morning on a bus when a text about a stuffed frog's water cycle speech had made her smile in a way she hadn't smiled in longer than she could precisely measure. She'd walked into a transaction and found something that had no end date and more room in it than anything she'd been able to imagine from a studio apartment with a clanking radiator and rent that outpaced everything else. The radiator, she would learn much later, had stopped clanking in March because the pipe that caused it had finally corrected itself under pressure. A structural adjustment, the building super explained, that happened sometimes with old systems. Nothing had actually been trapped inside the wall. It had just been the sound of something working too hard for too long, and then it settled, and then it was quiet. She thought about that sometimes. She thought about how the things that make the most noise aren't always the things in crisis. Sometimes they're just the things that have been holding on alone. And the noise is the sound of effort, and the quiet comes when the weight gets shared. The evening wound down the way good evenings do. Slowly, without anyone wanting to be the one to end it. Lily ate 3 pieces of calamari and declared it acceptable, which was high praise. The bread was not finished, as predicted. Senator attended the dinner from inside the bag and was briefed on its highlights afterward by Lily, who provided a thorough summary on the drive home. Emma sat in the back seat beside Lily, who was fighting sleep with the determination of someone who has things left to say, and Adrian drove, and the city passed in its familiar nighttime arrangement of lights and motion, and Emma looked out the window at all of it, the streets she'd walked for 6 years, the bus routes she'd memorized, the buildings that had been backdrops to a harder version of this life. And she felt, simply and without performance, that she was in the right place. Not because it was easy. It wasn't. Nothing real was easy, and she knew that better than most, and she was not under any illusion that the hard parts were behind her. There would be more midnight tables, more mornings that didn't cooperate, more moments of miscommunication and badly timed silences, and the specific friction of 2 people who'd both spent a long time working things out alone, still learning to let someone else carry part of the weight. But she was choosing it. With full information, with open eyes, with the understanding that choosing something hard and real was different from surrendering to it. And that was the thing, she thought, looking at the city going past, with Lily's head drooping finally toward her shoulder and Adrian's eyes finding hers briefly in the rearview mirror. The thing nobody tells you about the life you don't plan for. It doesn't arrive looking like a rescue. It arrives looking like a decision. A series of small, quiet, imperfect decisions made by imperfect people, adding up to something that mattered. That was all. That was everything. Lily was asleep by the time they reached the house. Adrian carried her in. She'd grown past the easy age for it, but she still fit, just barely. The way things that are about to change always seem to hold their shape one last time before they shift. Emma got the door, and Senator, who'd fallen out of the bag in the car and needed retrieving with the care such diplomatic figures deserved. She held the stuffed frog in the hallway of the house, while Adrian got Lily settled upstairs, and she looked around at the space. The plant by the door that was still struggling but still there, The bicycle she'd moved to the side of the porch so nobody tripped on it, the warm light of the hallway, and thought about how strange and ordinary and enormous the whole thing was. Adrian came back downstairs. He looked at Senator in her hands and then at her face. "She's out," he said. "Good." Emma looked down at Senator. He gave a very composed performance at dinner. He always does. Adrian came and stood near her in the hallway, not trying to make it a moment, just being in the same space, the way you are with someone you've earned the ease with. "You don't have to go if you don't want to." She looked at him. "There's a guest room," he said. "If it's easier than the drive." "No." He paused, editing himself. "I just mean you don't have to go." She looked at Senator. She looked at the struggling plant. She looked at Adrian Cole, 32 years old, billionaire, single father, careful and imperfect, and tired in the honest way and exactly himself in the hallway of his own house on an ordinary, extraordinary evening. "I'll stay," she said. He nodded once. The simplicity of it. She put Senator back on the hall table, in his regular position, facing out. He did look, she thought, like someone about to make a very important announcement, someone who had weighed the matter and knew what needed to be said. The house settled around them into its nighttime quiet. Outside, the old trees did whatever old trees did. Somewhere across the city, a bus went by on a route she knew by heart, carrying people home from wherever they'd been. Emma Hart, 30 years old, communications professional, former service worker, person who read 50 pages of frog research before dinner because she thought someone might need her to. She stood in a hallway that was not hers and was becoming hers, and thought about how the thing that saved you was almost never the thing you went looking for. It was usually something you agreed to without knowing why, at a moment when you had no other options, and it turned out to be the only option that mattered. She went upstairs. The house was quiet. The night held. And somewhere on the hall table, Senator maintained his position, reliable and still, ready for whatever the morning brought.